Chapter 1082. My name is Luo Nan. I'm 17 years old this year. I'm a 10th grade student at Acumen College in Xia City. Luo Nan was very serious and very solemn as he announced his true identity from behind the auction stage. It was because of this truth that a sense of dislocation was formed. This caused this auction to instantly become the scene of a youth group speech competition. Emotions of astonishment and absurdity interweaved within the brilliantly lit auction house. Even though Luo Nan had just given them a cold stab, there were still quite a few people present. They hesitated whether or not they should laugh and support him. In reality, the atmosphere of the auction house was indeed slipping towards a speech competition. Luo Nan stood ramrod straight, allowing the auction stage to cover most of his body from his chest down. The visual effect really couldn't be described as tall and straight. Only his enunciation was clear. There's one reason why I'm standing here. It's because of the current auction item. The large screen behind him displayed the equipment that had been moved out from the 70 format laboratory and the corresponding annotations. It let all the bidders present know that this auction item included the original location of the wilderness laboratory that housed this equipment in addition to the equipment on the stage. This was a temporary layout of the auction house. The original stage was originally planned to be on the lower level, but it was already being pulled up to display the real thing. But due to Luo Nan's methods, the stage was torn to pieces. It was already impossible to continue with the original plan. It could only be transferred through the lens. It was hard on the staff of the auction house. These professionals specialized in visual effects were able to use light and shadow effects to create a desolate feeling of order amidst the chaos within the lens of this chaotic scene. This gave off a bit of a feeling of a stage play. Luo Nan seemed to be moved at this time. This is what my grandfather who has gone mad, my father whose life and death is unknown, and my mother who has already passed away. There are also a few seniors that I know and don't know. They single-handedly created this place in the wilderness. It represents their life experiences and achievements. It is also one of the few places that I know of that I can pay homage to. The dislocation of the bidders below the stage became even more clear. Some people were hesitant, wondering whether or not they should accompany Luo Nan with tears of sympathy to show their cooperation. Of course, there were even more people who were confused by Luo Nan's inexplicable speech. The whispers within the auction house were getting louder and louder. People needed to clearly understand the true logic behind this absurd scene. But at this time, Luo Nan laughed first. After saying so much, everyone should be able to tell that I obviously don't want to sell it. But someone beat me to it and sent it to the auction house. They even deliberately came to show off to me. There's nothing I can do. Luo Nan just smiled like this. His gaze swept across the field. It didn't matter if it was the hall or the private room. As long as he wanted to look, there was nothing that could obstruct him. At this time, he was the focus of everyone's attention. Luo Nan raised his left hand and gestured with 2 fingers. As for the other reason, isn't there a saying? No. In order to prevent this kind of thing from happening again in the future, although I am not a member of this circle, I must come here to face all the buyers and communicate with as many people as possible. I need you to know me, my mood, my thoughts, and my decisions, and to be able to seriously refer to and evaluate them. It's even better if you can get the corresponding respect. He was clearly smiling, but because of these words, the noise in the venue suddenly weakened. Many tycoons and experts who were whispering to each other subconsciously raised their heads and looked at the stage. His words were subtle and filled with hostility. Luo Nan continued to express his position. I'm still a student right now. I don't have a formal job. I can only rely on my limited lecture time to obtain some labor fees. At the same time, he had a lot of expenses, such as personal experiments, family security, and other miscellaneous expenses. He also owed a lot of debts, and his assets were really limited. He really did not belong to the same world as everyone else, and basically did not follow the same logic. Therefore, I can only use other, unconventional methods that everyone might not be familiar with to achieve my goals. Here, I have to thank the Toyama Auction House for giving me such an opportunity, allowing me to host this event and use this place to communicate with everyone. The trouble caused to the auction house. Mr. Toyama, right? Although you're not here, you should be paying attention to this. Luo Nan took the initiative to accurately find the camera. He borrowed the signal of the live broadcast to communicate with someone tens of thousands of kilometers away. Like this, I'll treat it as the interest you guys paid. I'll also consider forgiving you guys. Whether or not there were people smashing cups in Bancheng, thousands of miles away, they didn't know. But at this moment, the venue was already completely silent. Sound. Ha, he looks just like a terrorist. Abner, Constance, Star Shaman, and Romanus sat together in a certain luxurious suite some distance away from the venue. These four extraordinaries, who served in the Ability User Society's headquarters, were watching the live broadcast of the auction. Actually, they were looking at Luo Nan's attitude and performance. However, the evaluation was not made by any one of the four. It was made by the Old Witch of Death, who grew increasingly talkative as she grew older. Her real-time vibrations on the mental plane were enough to ensure that she could communicate with the other four extraordinaries without hindrance. Star Shaman was freed from the awkwardness of being a sound transmission puppet. His mouth appeared to be exceptionally lively, echoing with his teacher as he reprimanded Luo Nan. Is he trying to push the wall? Is he trying to expose the disputes of the inner world in front of everyone? This doesn't conform to the agreement we signed with the Star Alliance Committee. The people here barely have the authority to do so, Abner responded simply. As a genuine special guest of the auction, Abner did not participate in the event. One reason was that he needed to participate in the process had already been erased due to a minor accident. The other reason was that there was no need to step into Luo Nan's most sensitive domain during this special period of time. He felt that his previous expression was too vague, but he was unwilling to say too much, so he cast his gaze toward Romanus. Romanus immediately explained, currently, Mr. Luo Nan's actions really don't conform to the procedures of the inner world. However, 69% of the people here have the authority to know the truth. The remaining people can basically be adjusted to a certain level. There will be a corresponding psychological specialist to handle the situation. It won't cause too much trouble. Romanus paused for a moment before adding, when inviting others to participate in this sort of fringe event, it is clear that the inviting party and not the invited party that should bear the costs and the corresponding responsibilities. The Toyama auction house is not thorough enough in this regard. The corner of Star Shaman's lips twitched, but he just laughed it off in the end. In any case, it didn't matter if Abner said it himself or if Romanus explained it on his behalf, the change in attitude that was manifested was not something that could be hidden from others. Everyone present understood the reason. Death Shaman's telepathic thoughts flowed through the void, containing a subtle meaning. This kid doesn't seem like someone who can cooperate. Chapter 1083. Abner didn't respond. He just narrowed his eyes and focused on Luo Nan on the screen. He watched as this young man used a calmness that didn't match his age to communicate with the audience and everyone who was paying attention to the scene. This kind of scene was no longer the same as the first public lecture last year, where he only talked to himself in the professional field. It was also different from the almost one-sided display on the Zeolite Beach 2 days ago. The current Luo Nan seemed to have begun to pay attention to feedback. At the very least, he had begun to deliberately grab the attention of the people, deliberately provoking the emotions of the people. Just like right now. Since I'm in this position, I have to fulfill my duties as an auctioneer. Let's forget about the exaggerated statements on the screen and in the booklet. Frankly speaking, they're miles away from the main point. Luo Nan seemed to have returned to the main topic. He began to introduce the auction item, but he began with a rhetorical question. It seemed that he was very happy to interact with the bidders at the scene. How many people think that they are just a set of equipment and the address of an abandoned laboratory? It no longer has any practical value and can only satisfy the hobby of a few people. No one responded. The bidders at the scene did not respond enthusiastically enough. Because a considerable number of them had not figured out the situation, at least, not yet. Should they feign ignorance now? What about sneaking away? Or should he cooperate obediently? The atmosphere at the scene was somewhat awkward, especially in the eyes of the bystanders. The star sorcerer found it a little funny. This person is really full of resentment. However, what's the use of getting angry at these people? Should I answer my own questions? Or do you want to perform stand-up? Luo Nan laughed from behind the auction stage as he spoke. The audience was clearly cold, but Luo Nan looked like he had a card up his sleeve. There are quite a lot of them. There are about 31 or 32 of them. That's about 1/5 of the total, and it overlaps with the initial laughter. This means that everyone here really doesn't know anything about this. You're still a distance away from our circle. At the very least, you haven't come into contact with the most valuable things yet. I still have to work hard on the next step. As for this, in my opinion, it's best not to join in the fun. However, if he still hadn't made up his mind to leave, it might mean that he didn't have the chance to leave. Thus, he decided to just be a witness. Believe me, there is a reason for your existence. Where did he learn to act like a charlatan? The star shaman couldn't help but speak again, but his brows were already furrowed. There's still a round number, what right does he have to say that? Information. Speculation. Speaking skills. Shut up. The frequency of the old woman's mind oscillation increased slightly, and she displayed a different emotion. The room was silent for a time. Luo Nan continued to speak in a manner that was neither too fast nor too slow. I can see it too. I also don't know. There are some differences inside. There are some gentlemen and ladies who don't know about it, and they really don't know about it at all. But there are some gentlemen, yes, I'm talking about the one at table number 4 who is facing me, the one who is hugging girls on both sides. His heart is obviously clear, but his beautiful female companions are all clueless about it. This is a bit too much. This kind of frivolous joke was meant to tickle people's armpits. Most of the people present were experienced people who had been in business for a long time, so there were very few who laughed along with him. This was also because of Luo Nan's direction. The people present were all reputable characters. They were directly called out by name and the surrounding gazes were focused on them. It was hard for them to keep their faces. However, the person who was named was really stunned. It was obvious from his appearance that he was shocked. His anger was greater than his anger, and he had a classic expression on his face, as if his thoughts had been exposed. Don't be embarrassed, mister. Thank you for hearing about me from who knows where. Even though I don't know what your name is, there are quite a few people like you who are too much. Everyone should know this in their hearts. I know this as well. Luo Nan's bright gaze swept across the room once more. It seemed to be undirected, but practically everyone subconsciously lowered their gazes. They averted their gazes to avoid meeting his gaze, which seemed to be able to pierce through all secrets. Abner wasn't present, but he still unconsciously adjusted his sitting posture. He wasn't sure if Luo Nan really possessed the ability to read minds, but no one present had raised any objections up until now. Moreover, they had instinctively developed fear in their hearts. This proved that Luo Nan had already achieved initial control over the situation. He could place the emotions of over 100 billionaires and industry elites in the palm of his hand and knead them. This was becoming more and more different from past intelligence. Luo Nan began to fiddle with the remote control on the auction stage. He adjusted the display angle of the equipment on the large screen. Actually, there's no need for everyone's thoughts to be too complicated. In terms of pure equipment, only a few people have collectible value. But those who believe that it has collectible value are basically clear about the true value hidden behind it. The main thing is the location of its location, the object of its research, and the fact that it can be grasped. Me. Luo Nan's tone sounded careless. His words came from wherever he was thinking. But it was unknown how many people in the auction house were dripping with cold sweat because of his words. Their legs were trembling. Yes, more and more people were coming back to their senses. They had allowed this killing star, known as the humanoid infrasonic array, to come to the scene and stir up such havoc. How could there be anything good in the future? What's up with the Toyama auction house? What's up with Wang Yu? What's up with those people at headquarters? Could it be that the rumors were true? That the situation had spiraled out of control? There were already people looking all around, looking for a way to escape. There were also people who had begun to summon their bodyguards. Of course, contacting the organizers and co-organizers was also a very common choice. There were people who directly called Abner. Yes, it was through Romanus, the Secretary General. Abner had already entered a state of communication silence. He was the highest leader of the society in this critical moment. Whether it was in name or in reality, he needed to leave some leeway for final adjustments. Romanus was very experienced in this aspect. Although the people who were able to call him were all big shots who had gone through many rounds of requests, he was still able to calmly respond no matter what request the other party made. Actually, there weren't any new tricks. It was nothing more than targeting Luo Nan. Requests to stop him, reprimands, pleads, and so on. During this period of time, Romanus spoke the most words. We are actively communicating with Mr. Luo Nan. We have transmitted a clear signal, and we await his reply. This was the honest truth. Of course, everyone understood the second half of the unfinished sentence. Luo Nan had already received their words, but he didn't give a clear response. Romanus repeated the same sentence pattern and meaning many times, but he didn't show the slightest bit of impatience. He also didn't show any resentment towards Luo Nan. This was because he understood very well that if he were to stand in Luo Nan's position, he wouldn't be clear either. He borrowed this thinking space to toss and turn a few things. He wanted to probe the bottom line of headquarters a step further. This was the smartest choice. Abner took the initiative to release a signal of cooperation to Luo Nan through the dual channels of Blood Demon and Her Majesty Empress Wu. He didn't explicitly state the method or the time limit of the feedback. The 2 hours from 8 in the evening to 10 in the evening were tantamount to giving Luo Nan a window to express and vent his emotions. Everyone was calculating their own bottom line, recalculating. Luo Nan was acting recklessly right now. Of course they were nervous, but they could also observe the intentions of the other party. If Luo Nan had straightforwardly agreed to headquarters' request and maintained a relatively calm and reserved manner, they would have breathed a sigh of relief right now. However, they would absolutely not express their thanks in a formal meeting. On the contrary, they would certainly take a step forward and launch an attack, all the way until they touched Luo Nan's bottom line. Luo Nan's current lack of response was precisely a display of taking the initiative. For the time being, this was correct. Everything was within expectations, but there was one thing that Romanus didn't understand. What was the true meaning behind Luo Nan's venting? Was it purely for considerations of the negotiation situation? This conjecture was admittedly reasonable, but it didn't quite match with Luo Nan's way of thinking, which they grasped. Even if Luo Nan's current behavior in public was more mature than before and had made great progress, there shouldn't be too many deviations in his innermost core. Luo Nan was a stubborn youth who always focused on all sorts of regular structures. He tended to use a set of logical programs to deal with all problems. How could he suddenly become a great charlatan who stirred people's hearts? This wasn't a question of understanding or not. It depended on whether or not his knowledge and ability system could support him. For this reason, Romanus had two conjectures. First, Luo Nan's knowledge structure was more complete and profound than people's previous judgments, deductions, and conjectures. He possessed an even more powerful system to support him. Second, perhaps there was a more direct and purer goal behind the seemingly complex schemes of the human heart. Romanus walked to the balcony outside the suite for the sake of answering the phone. This was one of the areas with the best view on the jade light, but right now he could only see the flickering lights of the ship. The surrounding area was flooded with dark clouds and waves. His eyes weren't good, and his mental senses were warped and disturbed by the increasingly complex changes in the magnetic field. Though it wasn't to the extent of being blind with one's eyes wide open, Luo Nan felt as if he had missed something. It was as if he had missed some extremely important details. Or perhaps, they had never understood the details of the book. Luo Nan's voice was transmitted and restored in the room through the digital signal. There's a very complicated thread of story behind this set of equipment. There are some things that even I don't quite understand. Perhaps there are some people here who know more than I do. Yep, I can't limit myself to the scene. There are some gentlemen and ladies who are paying attention to this place through the live broadcast signal. They are much clearer than I am. But no matter what others think, since I'm standing here, I will do my utmost to display its value. It won't just be a gimmick to display my strength and a tool to pinch others. And I believe that this process will bear corresponding fruits. I will piece together more truths. This isn't something that can be changed by the will of certain people. Romanus turned around just in time to see Luo Nan's smile on the screen. It was exceptionally brilliant. Chapter 1084. What an incredible young man. Michiko Kawahara was standing in the center of the exhibition hall in Area C. In front of her was the arc-shaped booth that was torn apart by an unknown force. But now, the original outline could no longer be seen. People's attention was more easily attracted by the broken cracks themselves. These cracks were so huge that there was no support between the pieces of the booth. It seemed that it was impossible to resist the heavy equipment above and could collapse at any time. However, they stood there steadily. The closer they were, the more details they saw, the more incredible it was. According to the original plan, this place should have been upgraded to the next floor before the auction started and served as the main exhibition area. But at this time, the young man who was talking in the venue directly ruined this plan. However, some pre-installed equipment around it could still work, so this place was temporarily enclosed and used as half of the backstage. At this time, many staff members were walking back and forth here, dealing with various problems, at least on the surface. No matter how busy the staff members were, they carefully bypassed the central booth area. At the same time, there were some researchers with different backgrounds, carrying large and small instruments, carefully walking through the cracks in the steel, trying to find more valuable clues. Two different circles temporarily went hand in hand with each other. Michiko Kawahara was here. Through the ubiquitous screens and projections, she was paying attention to the progress of the auction. She watched the young man who completely distorted the trajectory of her life speak on the stage. He also distorted the thoughts and wills of others. Surprisingly, she didn't have too much resentment. She was more envious, and she thought of her son. If Jie can become like this when he grows up, it should be something to be proud of. She didn't have much feelings for her tool husband, but her stubborn and cute young son was one of the important fulcrum of her life. Just thinking about the future a little, even if it was mostly fantasy elements, could remove some of the barriers in her heart and reduce some of the pressure. This rare moment of freedom did not last for long. Because of the series of changes at the auction site, while the headquarters was under pressure, they also transmitted more intense pressure and even emotions. Bastard! How can you change the process and personnel of the auction at will? Are you going to bet on Toyama's decades of reputation? Michiko Kawahara took a deep breath, adjusted her breathing, and answered with an appropriate calm attitude. Vice President, I am following the instructions of the Board of Directors. I have obtained Mr. Luo Nan's understanding. I haven't occupied any resources outside of my authority. The voice on the other side suddenly rose a notch. So you're using the reputation of the Toyama family as a bargaining chip and recklessly throwing it out? Obviously, Shingo Toyama, the grandson of President Kenta Toyama, was so angry that he blurted out some inappropriate words. However, he wasn't completely stupid. He forcefully turned the situation around. The board of directors only gave you the order to control the unsold, and no other authority. Are you trying to be smart, or are you deliberately avoiding the question? Look at the situation now. That damned brat actually named the president. How much pressure and passivity will this bring to the company? Vice President, forgive me for having a different opinion. Michiko Kawahara still maintained a calm tone. I believe that compared to actively creating an unsold auction in public, passively accepting under power should be more reasonable and easier for people to understand. After all, the other side was an influential figure in the upper-class circle. Moreover, as an executive, and as a negotiator, I have the authority to temporarily change the process of the first-level auction. No, you don't. Shingo Toyama was practically roaring. If I were merely a sounding board, then the board of directors wouldn't need to send me thousands of miles away to the Pacific Ocean. Michiko Kawahara's voice had a bit more of a biting cold metallic tone. Forgive me for speaking frankly, but according to your understanding, Vice President, you don't expect or hope for this public relations to achieve results? Is it to avoid a momentary victory that magnifies one's own inferiority under power? There was a crash on the other side, and it was unknown what had fallen. Shingo Toyama's voice was clenched into a ball in his fury. He rolled in his throat. Kawahara, are you sure you know what you're saying? Even if you're the representative of the Kawahara clan. You're throwing your clan's face into the mud when you're saying these wild and absurd words. How shameful, Kawahara. Ah, I'm truly sorry. Michiko Kawahara used an insincere tone to respond. I will reflect on myself. Please forgive me for being overly excited after completing this mission. Then she hung up the call. Her lips drew a biting cold arc, and it just so happened that Luo Nan's brilliant smile echoed it. The Kawahara clan? Wasn't she already prepared when she was pushed out without hesitation? Was she prepared to sacrifice herself? There really was a truth hidden in the words she spoke to her subordinates before this. She already didn't have the qualifications to return. At the very least, she didn't have the status as an executive. Before and after she accepted this troublesome task, she had also heard similar rumors, but she could not find any reasonable logic in it. Therefore, she still had a glimmer of hope, and even the miraculous fantasy of a lower class overturning the upper class. But now she was disappointed. It was as she said. The board of directors wasn't prepared to succeed at all. They really did want to abandon her, and only she was allowed to be abandoned. Under these circumstances, her efforts had turned into rebellion. This wasn't a good sign. Michiko Kawahara was an outstanding woman who often struggled in the business world, especially in a region like Banching that traditionally lacked strong women. Her will was very firm for her to be able to stand out. She was already prepared to experience a low tide in her heart. She wasn't prepared to go back and suffer the reprimand and humiliation of those old fellows who had decided her fate. She was aware of the consequences of internal strife, but she couldn't accept this misfortune that was like winning the lottery. She would just directly transfer to a flight in D-City. She would go to the new continent or the old continent's inland cities and nurse her body and mind. She would make plans after the rumors died down. Her accumulation over the years, whether in terms of wealth or connections, was enough to support her to live a leisurely life. Of course, Koji, who was staying in Bancheng, was also a problem. The identity of the fourth-generation heir of the Kawahara family might not be so secure. If it really didn't work out, she would agree to a family marriage after a period of deadlock. She was still quite valuable in the eyes of the 40 to 80 generations of Bancheng's political and business community. Or, she could find a suitable son-in-law and use marriage to try to climb up in a new field. Michiko Kawahara calmly planned the future for herself and began to circle some preliminary candidates. She knew that this was another form of pressure relief. But in any case, it was meaningless to stay on the Jade Light. Michiko Kawahara glanced at the dazzling young man on the auction stage again and directly turned around to leave. At the same time, she contacted her secretary to arrange the follow-up itinerary. Executive Director Kawahara, you can't leave. Suddenly, someone rushed in front of her and blocked her way. Michiko Kawahara was shocked. At this time, the broken booth behind her suddenly made a harsh friction sound, and it was getting louder and louder. It was like the prelude to the collapse of the whole thing. Chapter 1085. The booth shook, startling the backstage staff and researchers, but they did not see any obvious structural changes. In this place, the external structure was not reliable. Some of them were especially excited after the fright, such as Dr. Suncan. While the booth was shaking, he had a strong premonition. At the same time, the surveillance equipment he had brought over also captured a clearer signal. Forward, forward. No, up. In his excitement, Song Khan's instructions weren't clear enough. In the end, he simply took over personally, ignoring the danger and rushing to the front line to direct the adjustment of the equipment parameters. Kawahara Machiko looked at the booth structure and the subsequent noise. It was the same. Anyway, a non-professional like her wouldn't be able to see anything, so she turned back and faced the person who stopped her. Minister Kawamoto, I remember that you are the on-site dispatcher. Aren't you going to take a look? No, General Manager Kawahara, my current mission is to stop you. Kawaguchi Tashimoto was the one who answered the call from the vice president, Shingo Toyama, and questioned Kawahara Machiko's behavior. Kawahara Machiko wasn't angry. Instead, she laughed. Why are you stopping me? Hiku sang, you are too nervous. This has nothing to do with me now. I won't do anything else. Hiku Jun was a robust man in his 40s. Apart from his slightly sparse hair, his face and body shape were relatively regular. However, at this moment, his face was flushed, and his eyes were shining. He was nervous and excited. Manager Hyuen, you can't do anything else on the ship, but there's something you must do. You must immediately return to Ban City to report on your work, and not anywhere else. Kawahara Machiko shook her head. This is not something you should consider. That's right. But now, I have been authorized by the board of directors to supervise your execution of this order. Hiku Jun took a few deep breaths and adjusted his mentality. You don't need to doubt me, Mr. Hara. I'm here to deliver the message for you, or for the dignity of the Hara family. If you refuse, there will be a clearer order, and at that time, I may not call you Mr. Hara anymore. Did you accept someone's order in your dreams? Kawahara Machiko coldly commented, stupid guy, you don't have the right, and the board of directors doesn't have the right to imprison an executive director. Hiku Jun, who was judged to be stupid, became calmer and calmer. The company doesn't have it, but the parent company does. If the parent company doesn't have it, there are higher-ups. In comparison, I may be stupid, but what are you? The robust man began to approach Kawahara Machiko, but the latter's icy gaze had already lost the power to stop him. However, when Kawaguchi Jun approached, his voice softened, Jinzi, I don't want to care about what fate awaits you, I also need to work hard for my own fate. However, on account of the fact that I was once your candidate for marriage, I don't want to forcibly deprive you of your authority. You can try to understand it, even if the more you understand, the more despair you will feel. Your situation is much worse than you imagined. Kawahara Machiko was slightly absent-minded, but she quickly stared at Kawaguchi Jun. This man was inferior to her in the workplace, but his outstanding family and school background were enough to support a considerable number of contacts and intelligence channels. What do you know? I don't know anything. But I clearly know that ever since you were chosen to accept this assignment, the value of your routine has only been a bow of apology. And then there's a tool called Kawahara Machiko. It's just that you became a special choice at a special time. Regardless of success or failure, it has become your symbol. Kawaguchi Jun's tone was extremely gentle, just like when he was trying to understand back then. But his eyes were as dirty and greedy as they were back then, and there was even a certain hidden pleasure in them. Jinzi, you know that many people will be interested in this symbol. They are actually interested in Luo Nan, or perhaps they fear him, or revere him. But they have no way to confront him head-on, so they found you. In a certain sense, you possess a certain collectible value because of your so-called hookup with him. Kawahara Machiko faced these extremely offensive and insulting words with indifference. These things sounded absurd and dirty, but in some circles, they didn't count for much. If she was a normal person in the business world, this might not necessarily be the case. But she was a rather famous family representative who still revolved in the traditional and decadent circles of power. The backlash would come even more cruelly. She was a member of that traditional and decadent circle. She used to look at others with cold eyes, but now it was finally her turn. It wasn't strange at all. Kawahara Machiko even curled her lips and sneered a bit. Yes, that's the expression. That's the way you are. The corner of Kawaguchi Jun's eyes twitched, and a flush of red suffused his face. He advanced half a step forward, practically sticking close to Kawahara Machiko's body. He lowered his voice to the point that it was nearly inaudible amidst the trembling noise of the steel structure of the original exhibition stage. I know that you'll definitely understand. You see, we're all thinking the same thing. The scene in the auction, Luo Nan's words. Actually, if we followed the original plan to auction off those cumbersome equipment, it would be exactly the same as your current situation. That young gentleman destroyed this auction, but he increased his value. He's like a powerful source of radiation. He shoots rays at your body, causing you to emit a dangerous yet enchanting light. There are plenty of people in this world who don't dare or can't touch him in person. But they hope to go through you, to personally feel the power of that power, to the point of destroying, to the point of trampling. So you're having an orgasm? Kawahara Machiko didn't dodge. Her smile became even deeper and more mocking. The instant the words left her mouth, she suddenly lifted her skirt and lifted her knee, ramming it toward the lower abdomen of the man in front of her. However, Kawaguchi Jun understood her far too well. Even though his heart was in chaos, he was still prepared. He used his hand to block in a dangerous situation. He broke out in a cold sweat, but he still grinned and laughed hoarsely. It's coming. Machiko, I've always been watching you. In the future, I'll also. Huh? Kawaguchi Jun suddenly froze. He was facing the direction of the original exhibition stage. Even though 90% of his attention was placed on Kawahara Machiko, he could still receive some information from the corner of his eye, especially the especially obvious ones. It seemed that the original exhibition stage, before Kawaguchi Jun could figure out what was going on, a shadow strolled over. The shadow reflected the lights of the exhibition stage, only revealing a gloomy silhouette that was reflected in his eyes. You guys racked your brains to torment this kind of restricted plot. Have you ever considered that there are minors present? The young man faithfully restored his slightly hoarse voice. It was quite recognizable. Let's not talk about whether I like it or not. The problem is that your level of concentration is clearly lacking. Shouldn't I be the center of attention? At this time, Kawahara Machiko struggled free from Kawaguchi Jun's grip with all her might, pulling away from him. She was still gasping for breath, but she was startled by Luo Nan's sudden appearance. Why was Luo Nan, who was speaking confidently and with assurance on the upper floor of the auction house, here? Her reaction speed surpassed Kawaguchi Jun's by quite a bit. She swept a glance behind Luo Nan and saw that the original exhibition stage was still in ruins. She quickly turned to face the other side of the exhibition stage, then she felt a bit dizzy. What appeared in her field of vision was no longer the screen that shielded the original exhibition stage. Instead, it was the messy arrangement of banquet tables. There were also over 100 people dressed in formal attire. They were bright and beautiful, but right now they were stupefied. It was as if they were in a dream. The auction house. No, Kawahara Machiko turned her head once more, but she saw the original exhibition stage, which was still buzzing and trembling. It was in pieces. Thud. Kawaguchi Jun finally reacted at this time, but he was in a much worse state than Kawahara Machiko. His rising momentum vanished like smoke into thin air. He turned around a few times in a daze, and his legs became knotted as he tripped and fell to the ground. It was only at this time that his heart, which was filled with bewilderment, was shaken out of his throat. Where is this? No one answered him. Perhaps no one could answer him. Kawahara Machiko turned her gaze again and looked at the audience below the stage, at the frightened and stiff bidders. Almost no one was looking at them. In fact, they didn't even pay attention to them from the beginning to the end, even though there was an extremely explosive and delightful plot here. The reason for this was because there was an even more conspicuous, enormous, and inconceivable object and change appearing before everyone's eyes. Kawahara Machiko was a person who had been neglected in the cracks. She gradually found reason amidst her dizziness, and she let it display extraordinary effects. She jumped out of her experience and logic. She found a barely acceptable explanation for the situation before her eyes. It was the only explanation she had. The original stage on the lower floor overlapped with the auction stage on the upper floor. The original plan that Luo Nan had destroyed and caused the staff to tear up with tears in their eyes had taken a big turn. Now, it was presented in such a form before the eyes of all the participants present. Had the upper floor collapsed, or had the lower floor been lifted up? There was no answer. Kawahara Machiko didn't feel anything else from start to finish, aside from the sound of the vibrating metal structure beside her ears. And the reality before her eyes was this: the two floors that were specially used for display had a total height of nearly 10 meters. They overlapped together in such a gentle manner. There wasn't even any substantial conflict between them. The auction stage in front of Luo Nan had disappeared without a trace. That was why he strolled to the front of the stage. This was the place where the original exhibition stage barely had a foothold. Of course, this was a more suitable location for focus. Here, he smiled as he welcomed the gazes of everyone present and the entire world. He also felt the sudden explosion of the depths of their perception and emotions. Even if no one spoke, Luo Nan knew. And it wasn't just the people present. It wasn't just the pitiful first-line personnel on the jadeite light. It included all the living beings in a wider range who were paying attention to this place in various forms. That's right. Luo Nan's soul cloak had been damaged by sin poison. It was riddled with holes, and it had seriously degenerated. It temporarily didn't possess the ability to monitor the entire world, but he still had other methods of detection. For example, a closed system. The so-called closed system was originally a solution formed by Luo Nan to deal with the lack of range and sensitivity of his mental senses. It used its own laws to distort the me and not me as a standard to capture and analyze the target. During this process, Luo Nan used the method of order construction from the near to the far, from the inside to the outside, to form a telescope-like clairvoyance mode. It captured details that were originally unknown to him outside the range of his mental senses. After the soul cloak took form, this system wasn't very useful. It only existed as a large production line for soul strength. However, the Luo Nan Qi, which pointed directly at the laws of the human heart, was actually born from this system. Now, the detection function of the closed system was online once more. And after a period of tempering, coupled with the infiltration and changes of the mica structure, it was much more sensitive than it was in the beginning. The root of the problem was that a tiger would not fall even if it died. A tree would still have its roots cut off. Traces of the layout of the past were left behind in the world. Luo Nan's soul cloak and the mica structure recombined and reconstructed, rapidly expanding. The living beings that were once covered by the soul cloak, shrouded by the living starry sky, and bound by the altar's spiderweb would more or less respond. They had already been sent into the Luo Nan Qi. They would continue to profit from it, becoming food for the growth of the frame of Luo Nan's body and soul. At the very least, they would become the Cepheid variables that radiated periodic pulsations on the star atlas. They would provide a clear reference. There were also rich and powerful people from all walks of life who had joined the auction through remote signals. It wasn't necessarily that there weren't any of them. It should be said that there were certainly such existences. This was the result of Luo Nan's soul cloak, the altar's spiderweb, and even the daytime nightmare covering the 500 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface region. However, the vast majority of these people did not know Luo Nan before this. Or perhaps they knew him but they had no interest in him. They did not directly touch the switch, and they were unable to form a corresponding relationship. The core function of the Luo Nan Qi had always been dormant. Right now, they were just making up for this lesson. The corresponding relationship had indeed been established. It didn't matter what sort of goal these people had in observing, considering, or scheming. For example, the arrangements made against Kawahara Machiko were filled with filthy and inferior thoughts. They took pleasure in doing so. But their original thoughts really did revolve around the central axis of Luo Nan. They spun and formed slender threads of sugar. They became ingredients that might not be tasty, but they were indeed usable. The reason why Hikujun was so impatient to reveal his true feelings was because of the interference and influence of the Luo Nan Qi. But this wasn't enough. If they had this kind of energy, why did they need to blindly stir things up? Luo Nan believed that the chaotic emotions of these people needed a clearer direction. They needed a more intuitive stimulus. This kind of thing didn't count. And so, Luo Nan clapped his hands. Everyone, focus your attention. The reason I've changed the layout of the booth is to enhance the display effect. I don't have enough experience in controlling the scene. If this little magic trick has troubled everyone, then we need to clear our minds and return to the most valuable level. Chapter 1086. A little magic trick. Do the youngsters nowadays all have this kind of temperament? Death Shaman had lived for a long time and was used to flaunting his seniority. He was too lazy to beat around the bush, so he spoke more and more bluntly. No one in the room responded immediately. Almost 5 seconds passed before Constance, who had been silent all this while, spoke. The spatial distortion layers are almost perfect. Just almost. Star Shaman subconsciously retorted. His eyebrows were furrowed, and his pale face was nearly transparent. A layer of faint, illusory light circulated within it. It looked like he was staring at the projection on the screen, but he was actually releasing his mental senses to observe the situation. The upper layer has been swallowed up, allowing the lower layer to be lifted up. No, it's directly squeezed together. Then there's the open spatial fault. The connection with the local spacetime is very subtle. Conventional experience was practically meaningless when it came to spatial shifts. Star Shaman's ability to say these things proved that his insight and knowledge were top-notch. Plus, he really did find some flaws. Fortunately, the light was bright. Otherwise, the curtain wall behind us would have been warped long ago. Indeed, it was as Star Shaman said. There was a clear distortion in the material and shadow structure behind the overlapping booth. This was the result of the spatial fault of the newly opened and temporarily swallowed upper layer of the booth. It was the result of mutual interference with the squeezed and distorted local spacetime. And the flaw he was referring to was actually nitpicking. The visual effect was even more astonishing. No matter what, a design was just a design. The execution was the most important thing. A partial distortion of local spacetime, combined with the concealment of the spatial fault. It's almost a dazzling display. Who else could do such a thing now? Ouyang Chen, Apollon, and Connie. The people Abner pointed out were all famous spatial masters of the inner world. They all possessed the ability to construct spatial distortions and shifts. Among them was Constance, who was next to him. I need time. Constance was very calm. Also, if it's just a temporary confusion without considering the consequences, Robbie can do it as well. He can even do it better. That clown. Abner furrowed his brows just thinking about it. However, thinking of so many possibilities, he more or less weakened the shock brought by Luo Nan's magic. In addition, he also remembered that the information stated that Luo Nan had gone to the booth to use his methods as soon as he arrived on the jadeite light. There had been 5 to 6 hours in between. Luo Nan should have made preparations in advance. Abner tried to calm himself down, but he noticed that the Star Shaman was staring at him. This display of extraordinary power and the corresponding force of pushing the wall is a little difficult to explain. It's okay. It's just an understatement. Abner described it in a very Eastern way with a smile. The Star Shaman sneered. Combining Abner's and Necromancer's evaluations together, it might be closer to reality. But when it came to Luo Nan himself, he was in the middle of the situation. He really wasn't too clear on what kind of mentality he was in. He just stood in front of the stage, letting himself become the focal point of everyone's gazes. He also evaluated the present situation and the effects he needed to achieve in the future. Luo Nan's earlier greeting wasn't completely effective. There was still some chaos in the auction house. In addition to the auditory noise created by the participants' shock and bewilderment, there was also visual interference. Standing closest to the front was Kawahara Michiko and Kawaguchi Jun, who was sitting on the ground. This was fine, but behind them were the stupefied researchers led by Song Kansas. There were also the backstage staff. It was a bit of a mess. Especially since they were in the cracks of the steel structure. Luo Nan had to be careful not to step on their heads as he walked back and forth on the stage. It was a fly in the ointment. If he had known earlier, he would have sucked them into the spatial fault. Luo Nan was a bit moved by his lack of experience. Then he signaled with his eyes. The target of his gaze was obviously Kawahara Michiko, who was closest to him. Her status was also relatively suitable. Kawahara Michiko was startled for a moment. She looked at Luo Nan again. Though no words were exchanged, she actually understood Luo Nan's intentions. She gave a slight bow and bypassed Kawaguchi Jun, the on-site supervisor. Luo Nan issued an order to the backstage staff, telling these people who seemed to have fallen into a dream to quickly withdraw and bring along those researchers. Where could they retreat to at this time? The people on this side of the stage could see the warped state of the area behind them. In fact, their colleagues on that side weren't brought up at all. Perhaps they were left on the lower level, or perhaps they were swallowed. This wasn't a problem they had to consider. They could only withdraw in the direction of the emergency passageway of the auction house under Kawahara Michiko's command. Song Kan originally wanted to struggle a bit, but he looked at Luo Nan's back and lost his courage in the end. There were 20 to 30 people and some equipment. It would be quite a scene to withdraw. Even if they were to leave through the emergency passageway, they would still have to pass through the area where the participants were. Over 100 billionaires and experts at the scene just stared blankly at the stream of people who had abruptly appeared along with the shattered stage. They passed by them. Suddenly, someone in the front row reached out and grabbed the corner of a staff member's clothes. He really grabbed it. The clamor within the auction house suddenly rose to a new level. After all, there were some people in the auction house who were still stuck within the scope of daily experience. They confused the spectacle before their eyes with the advanced visual technology of the modern world. They were surprised, but they didn't feel the impact of breaking common sense. But in the instant the corner of their clothes was grabbed, the boundary between reality and unreality was completely broken. The buzzing noise suddenly became chaotic and even sharp. Many people needed to adjust and adapt. Luo Nan saw all of this with his eyes, and his train of thought became even clearer. Sure enough, AR and VR technology were all the rage in the modern world. The more one saw the visual impact, the more likely it was that they would overlook key things. His methods were a bit more straightforward when faced with this kind of situation. Luo Nan didn't control the scene for the time being. He allowed the clamor to continue, and he had ample time to make better preparations. For example, he took out the suitcase with the notebook and drawing materials from the spatial fault. He let the notebook return to its original position, the exact same position as shown on the catalog of the auction items. In addition, he also had to admit that as the upper stage was moved away, the original stage was hastily replaced, and the large screen behind it was gone. The holographic projection equipment that was originally designed below was removed, and the chaos of overlapping space was behind it. Not to mention the visual effect, the subsequent presentation would also require some effort. Luo Nan looked at the suitcase. It was stuffed to the brim with black cloth. It was what Blood Demon called the secret deed book, and he had a new idea. He did it as soon as he thought of it. He snapped his fingers, and the secret deed book in the suitcase soared up like a living dragon. They connected and pounced onto the chaotic background curtain wall behind the stage. They twisted and unfolded, blocking it. How many secret deeds were there in total in a small suitcase? It was impossible to cover the area behind the stage no matter what. In fact, Luo Nan only used them to cover a single corner, and they were basically all used up. However, this unique drawing material, known to be handmade by High Lord's secret deed, naturally had its own mystical aspects. Under the catalysis of Luo Nan's telepathic thoughts, the dark color of the book actually permeated to the two sides of the diagonal. Actually, this was the result of the special structural rules of the secret deed book spreading outwards. The surrounding dark chaos that Luo Nan had mobilized mixed together with the book. They resonated with each other, and in the span of a few breaths, the curtain wall behind the stage was completely dyed black. Luo Nan wiped it with his telepathic thoughts and nodded. This blackboard was fine, but why did it seem more and more like magic? He shook his head and laughed to himself. He didn't say much. He picked up a paintbrush that was congealed from a special powder and simply crushed the tip of the brush, causing it to return to its powdery state. Then he condensed his telepathic thoughts, forming a brush in the void, and began to paint. H4, a type organic powder followed Luo Nan's telepathic thoughts to form the most flexible of brush strokes. It could be traced, it could be hooked, and it could be brushed. In the blink of an eye, a diagram was laid out. There seemed to be fine sparks of electricity flickering within, giving off a bit of a laser engraving effect. Practically no one in the audience understood what Luo Nan was trying to do in the end. But humans were visual creatures in the end. The image was clear, and their imaginations came naturally. The first thing that appeared before their eyes was a world map. It was the Pacific Ocean version. Whether or not it was accurate was another matter. In short, it had the same meaning. It even took into account the curvature of the Earth's surface. It vaguely displayed a rather three-dimensional feeling, and it had the effect of slowly rotating from left to right, and from west to east. Such a drawing method required parts of the diagram to be born and destroyed, to be similar and to be continuous. There was probably no other artist in the world who had such quick hands aside from Luo Nan. Luo Nan didn't use his hands. He used his soul strength to interfere with reality, which was why he had such ability. The outline of the map was formed. Luo Nan was in the north-central region of the Pacific Ocean, slightly to the right of the 180th meridian. He drew a small circle, clearly marking the current location of the participants present. Then he pulled out an extremely direct line from the marked circle. It still followed the curvature of the Earth. It was like a newly planned route, pointing straight to the south-central plateau region of the old continent. Luo Nan drew another circle there, and then the line powder gathered together. The world map that had just formed was erased in an instant. Then it reorganized and divided, forming a new outline. Soon, one could see that this was the rough topography of the area, and it was still in the process of being refined. This gave off a bit of the flavor of a sand painting. Sure enough, big hands were capricious. Can't you just use a projection? Death Witch spat. This time no one responded. This was because everyone, including Death Witch, thought of a problem. Luo Nan had a very detailed grasp of that part of the world. Abner glanced at Romanus, and Romanus understood tacitly. He projected out a satellite map and compared it with Luo Nan's drawing on the blackboard. The precision is very high. Constance murmured. The satellite image was nothing more than this. But Luo Nan drew closer layer by layer, layer by layer. Every time the outline of a scale was formed, he would erase it and enlarge it. It was reasonable to say that he had drawn it in accordance with the satellite image. But the choice was appropriate, and the application was ingenious. It wasn't a simple transfer. Instead, it was a true understanding in the heart, and it was a representation of the outside world. This was a human method, not a mechanical reproduction. Just like this, the scale of Luo Nan's version of the map was enlarged all the way to around 1/500. It actually continued to be enlarged. At this scale, the larger community could no longer fit within his field of vision. But during the process of the image's manifestation, even if Luo Nan didn't say a word, everyone was certain that there was a clear focal point under his pen, and it was constantly drawing closer. Luo Nan used an extremely simple yet miraculous drawing technique to create a vivid and lifelike situation. It was as if he had brought the people of the auction house aboard a passenger plane. The plane was rapidly descending, heading straight towards the depths of the desolate and uninhabited wilderness. Rationally, the extraordinaries were convinced that this wasn't a simple problem of drawing technique. It also involved Luo Nan's guidance on the mental plane. The people at the scene weren't the only ones affected. They were affected as well. They all sensed a certain directivity. This was a hypnotic guidance structure. It was very likely that one would fall for it just by looking at it. This was a function that ordinary projections didn't possess, no matter what. Looking at it this way, Luo Nan's insistence on drawing could be explained. Finally, Luo Nan's drawing of the image was fixed at a certain scale. Right now it was practically 1:1. From the perspective of the audience, they were just a bit further away. They were looking at a shore from a distant position. It was like the edge of some lake. That's right. Luo Nan's drawing of the image gave more and more details to support it. The ripples of the water were calm and slightly hazy, the towering mountains in the distance, the dark clouds in the sky, and the wild animals that came here to forage for food and water. There were even some species that possessed clear mutant characteristics. All of them decorated the surroundings. Luo Nan's sketching technique was displayed to the fullest in this moment. Though it was a simple drawing, it was extremely charming. The viewer just needed to have a bit of imagination to have the feeling of being immersed in the scene. Some people thought that they should be at the center of the lake according to this point of view. This was a bit like virtual reality. Luo Nan didn't even need to say anything at this time. The vast majority of people could guess that the location of the laboratory that was bound to the auction equipment was at a certain location in this wasteland. Actually, many people had already gotten wind of this beforehand. But with Luo Nan's drawing, it really seemed like the next step was the opening scene of the laboratory's door. There were already people who began to secretly memorize the various details displayed in the drawing. Some people simply took pictures, preparing to borrow some supercomputer resources to quickly restore and compare. They wanted to seize the initiative and give it a try. There must be a second to everything. One person takes the lead, and the crowd follows blindly. Even though everyone knew very well that Luo Nan didn't have any reason to easily reveal the location of the laboratory to the public in this manner, they couldn't stop someone from setting an example. Soon, all sorts of lights flashed behind Luo Nan, who was engrossed in drawing. The amount of data transmitted in the venue and the surroundings increased dramatically. This level of concentration is what I need. Luo Nan evaluated. Under the control of his telepathic thoughts, the scene on the curtain wall maintained a seemingly ordinary yet extremely extravagant dynamic effect. Though the mountains didn't move and the water didn't move, the wild animals that drank water by the lakeshore displayed rich details of their activities. Especially the considerable number of wild donkeys by the lakeshore. They swarmed endlessly and slowly moved along the lakeshore, gradually revealing new details that were obscured by their figures. Luo Nan turned around at this time. Chapter 1087. The flashing lights shone on Luo Nan's face, reflecting a strange luster. Those who knew the inside story understood that this was the trace of a water vapor fake. Those who didn't know would never think in this direction. Actually, the vast majority of people in the auction house were currently focusing their gazes on the curtain wall behind Luo Nan as they were taking pictures. They had already entered a state of mind. They all wanted to know the ultimate secret and value contained within the ever-changing picture. It wasn't just them. The extraordinaries were the same. They all unconsciously raised their attention. According to Luo Nan's usual logic, he would certainly have to give some explanations here. As long as they could receive more information, they would accept it even if he said that they were just listening to a lecture. They even began to warm up. Death which asked a question, the plateau region in the south-central part of the old continent. It seems to coincide with a view from 2 days ago. It's the wheel hypothesis, right? Abner was extremely sensitive to similar information. Death which asked, is there any referential significance? I swept a few glances. The researcher seems to be from Xia City's academic circle. Wu Zuanliang and Ding Jiying are both world-class experts in the field of mutated ecology. They didn't directly analyze the structure of space and time. Instead, they provided circumstantial evidence from the field of ecology. They are quite insightful, and the academic world's evaluation of them is quite high. Romanus would never disappoint when it came to the details of information. However, Luo Nan disappointed them a few seconds later. It's pointless for you to want to know the specific location of the laboratory. Actually, you've already seen the reason. Take this booth for example. It involves a few techniques related to the structure of space and time. I don't need to explain the specifics. Most of you won't understand anyway. The group of extraordinaries looked at each other in dismay. They only heard Luo Nan continue speaking. All you need to know is that the research direction of this laboratory is space-time. If you must find a specific reference, the deep blue world is more suitable. Luo Nan's pupils flickered with an extraordinary splendor. They were reflected in the eyes of practically everyone present. You should all know about the deep blue world, right? Many people's eyes flashed. Regardless of whether they had a basic understanding of the word laboratory, they all knew the words deep blue world. There was no need to mention the meaning and value it represented. Luo Nan turned his hand and pointed behind him. The founders of the laboratory are also searching for another deep blue world over here. At the very least, I believe that there is an extremely high possibility that there is a new plane similar to the deep blue world. Perhaps it is a complete land of resources and treasures. Perhaps it is a shattered wreckage. But there is certainly such a plane. This is because you can see traces of two areas of space and time coming into contact and colliding over there. As he looked at the noisy scene in the auction hall, Star Shaman suddenly let out a chuckle and pursed his lips. He has ulterior motives. Of course, these extraordinaries from headquarters knew the inside story. They were even more aware that the 70 format laboratory itself was admittedly a research topic related to spacetime. However, it was still quite a distance away from a major discovery like the deep blue world. Of course, if Luo Nan himself knew the information, then it would be a completely different matter. The problem was that Luo Nan had omitted a very crucial element. He only used the simplest of analogies to crudely provoke the emotions and greedy thoughts of the bidders. The facts were very clear, but the motive was very subtle. Was Luo Nan doing what the enemy wanted to do ahead of time, leaving the enemy with nothing to do? Regardless of what the bystanders thought, Luo Nan was currently smiling on the stage. It looks like everyone is quite familiar with the deep blue world. I'll take the liberty to ask, but how many of you in the auction hall and from all over the world have invested in the deep blue world? It seems like a lot of people have. How much is the annual profit? The attendees below the stage really didn't know how to respond to Luo Nan's awkward chatter. In addition, Luo Nan gave them a serious feeling of unease. The pressure continued to rise. Some people's minds began to calm down from the temptation of the new plane. They felt that ensuring their own personal safety was the most reasonable choice. At the same time, the changes in the venue would inevitably attract the attention of the outside world. Security personnel continued to enter, and the order of the venue grew more and more chaotic. From this point of view, Luo Nan really wasn't a good controller of the venue. Luo Nan didn't seem to care. He didn't receive a response, so he simply called out names. He extended a finger and pointed at an old acquaintance. Mr. Hugging Women on both sides. How much profit can you get from that side every year? Everyone's gaze is focused in that direction for a time. Unfortunately, that Mr. Hugging Women on both sides was taking advantage of the chaotic scene to abandon his two female companions. He was preparing to leave without a sound, but he was instantly nailed to the spot. In the end, that person was experienced in the ways of the world. He just closed his eyes and forced a smile onto his face. Need to pee? No. Actually, Boss Luo, the financial reports from Deep Blue always say the same thing. They're about to enter the period of investment returns. Finally, someone laughed along with him. The laughter spread over a small area, and the atmosphere in the auction hall became much livelier for a time. Luo Nan laughed as well. Looks like it's going to be very hard. But this makes me even more curious. Why is it that everyone in the deep blue world is able to develop it in an orderly manner, regardless of whether there are any profits or not? But when it comes to my side, there's no sign of anything yet, and there are already people stirring up trouble everywhere? The air in the auction hall suddenly turned cold. Luo Nan was no longer smiling. Everyone, if the coordinates of the deep blue world were placed before your eyes right now, the resources and profits there, would you have the guts to do this? Would you be this proactive? Would you do this without Li Wei's permission? Oh, there are many among you who don't know him. There are also many who have come to support us. Forgive me for opening fire, but who told us to be in a capitalistic society? Everyone, how many of you don't have shares in Quantum Corporation, LCRF, Deep Blue, and the Apocalypse Project? These things have really given me quite a bit of trouble recently. Speaking of which, this is the driving force formed by the aggregation and circulation of capital under everyone's name. Sophistry. However, this appearance is the type that I admire. Blood Demon cackled loudly in the room. He applauded and applauded. That's right, these guys. What's the point of beating around the bush? Just directly slap them. The results will be the best. Zhang Yingying, who normally loved this sort of lively scene, found it a bit difficult to laugh. She shot a glance at Blood Demon and ridiculed him to herself. You're probably happy because he's pushing down the wall in a refreshing manner. It's true that Luo Nan's appearance is very refreshing, but how are we going to deal with the negative effects that follow? Don't look at the multimillionaires in the venue. They were bewildered and uneasy in front of Luo Nan. It was unknown how many people would feel resentment as long as Luo Nan made it through tonight. Not to mention the people who were watching the live broadcast from all over the world. In a certain sense, those who didn't come to participate were the true big shots. Perhaps the retaliation from that side would arrive before the auction was over. Zhang Yingying felt uneasy in her heart. She looked at Her Majesty Empress Wu. Her Majesty Empress Wu was no longer reading the Buddhist scriptures, nor was she looking at the situation of the venue on the large screen. She was a bit lost in her thoughts. Her gaze was directed at the cabin wall to the side. It was as if she wanted to see through these obstacles and see something. These were just Zhang Yingying's guesses. Then, Luo Nan's words and actions made her cry out in surprise. Frankly speaking, I really admire the driving force of capital. The simple word, benefit, is able to move a fellow far more powerful and troublesome than everyone here. Luo Nan didn't turn his head. He just pointed his thumb backward and pointed at the curtain wall. Figures formed where Luo Nan pointed. The first figure was a person Zhang Yingying was very familiar with, the Horned Demon. Zhang Yingying knew of Luo Nan's writing skills, but she didn't know why Luo Nan had drawn the image of the Horned Demon in such detail. It was as if the Horned Demon had been behind the pack of wild donkeys just a moment ago, and only now had his head popped out. Even though it was a simple sketch, one could see that the Horned Demon's clothes were tattered and barely covered his body. He was like a beggar squatting by the lakeside in a daze. She didn't have the chance to organize her thoughts before she heard Luo Nan say, "This is the fellow who makes decisions for me. Without him, there's a high probability that I wouldn't have intersected with everyone here. Yes, I'll say it again. He doesn't have my authorization. At least, he didn't in the past." Before anyone could figure out what Luo Nan meant, two more figures appeared one after the other. They were at the very edge of the curtain wall, one on each side. They felt a bit alienated from the main body of the painting, as if they were a bit disjointed. But it was unknown how many people's expressions changed when they saw their appearances clearly. This was especially true for the ability users of the inner world, including the extraordinaries. Of course, they knew who they were. Gong Qi and Jin Tong. The reason why they paled in fright was because of the timing of the appearance of the figures. But more importantly, the situation that was presented was extremely treacherous. It was different from the settings of the Horned Demons, which were close to the plateau environment. It was completely different from the appearance that everyone was used to. The impression of the people of the inner world was that Gong Qi was normally shrewd, ruthless, and gloomy. He rarely showed his emotions. But what was presented in the painting was his hair and beard standing on end. He had a malevolent expression as he flew forward to attack. As for Jin Tong, he still had a golden band around his forehead. He had a light and fierce appearance. However, he punched forward with a dense killing intent. His mouth cracked open in laughter. It was as if he had killed a powerful enemy. It was as if he had gone insane. This was absolutely not an ordinary scene, nor was it a deliberate ugliness. Anyone with a clear understanding of the situation could tell at a glance that this was the appearance of someone who had reached the pinnacle and was on the verge of decline. If one were to combine reality and consider things a bit more meticulously, it could be said that this was the final moment before death. Yet it was vivid and lifelike. His mind was connected. It was as if he would pounce out from the curtain wall in the next moment and die once more in front of them. Outside the venue, there was silence in a room filled with extraordinaires. The air they exhaled seemed to be wrapped in a cold air. No one expressed their opinion. Even the transcendent death shaman remained silent. At some point in time, everyone's gazes were focused on Abner's face. The latter covered the lower half of his face with one hand, revealing only his tightly furrowed brows. He looked like he was in deep thought. His sustainable and calm breathing, his gradually relaxing shoulder and neck muscles. All these details were enough to explain many things. With Abner's abilities, it was naturally not a problem for him to conceal it. However, his status and habits over the years made it meaningless to control such details. The star shaman and Constance looked at each other. They did not respond. In the end, it was the death shaman who sneered faintly on the mental level. In the auction hall, the people's reactions were a little slow. Among the participants, there were those who could recognize all three metahumans. There were also those who knew one or two of them. There were also those who did not know them at all. However, humans were high-level animals that could communicate. They could always fill in some of the truth through the flow of information. The noisy sound waves of the venue, as well as the dense interweaving of electromagnetic signals, were the carrier and representation of information transmission. In comparison, Kawahara Michiko, who stood to the side of the stage, had become an isolated island of information due to her awkward situation. There was no hope for communication, but this kind of loneliness could stimulate her thoughts. She was a bit absent-minded. She wanted to seize the opportunity to leave, but she felt that she might miss an opportunity to save herself. In the end, she looked at Luo Nan. She looked at this young expert who had warped her fate. She suddenly had a feeling, although Luo Nan was facing the venue right now, there was no one in his eyes. Even if he were to engage in interaction, he was only following a script that had already been designed. He was walking step by step. This was not arrogance, nor was it rigidity. It was just that the situation had developed to this point. The conditions were ripe for success. There was no longer any leeway or possibility for change. Luo Nan made a large movement at this time. He was still facing the venue. His arms were extended and his thumbs were flipped backward. He tapped twice on the two deranged portraits on the two sides of the curtain wall. He appeared frivolous and casual, but it matched his age. Actually, the listing of these two names is a bit offensive. It's unrelated to the main topic. But a friend keeps urging me to not always present Buddha with borrowed flowers. He says that I should take the initiative to take out some decent auction items and join in the fun. So I'll deal with it for the time being. Of course, I know that most people are too lazy to bid right now. It's fine. We'll talk about this later. Luo Nan returned to the main topic, regardless of whether or not others understood the deeper meaning of his words. I just talked about the location of the laboratory and the object of research. Honestly speaking, I don't know much about what will happen next. If anyone knows and can provide me with the corresponding information, I will be very grateful. As for the person I specifically pointed out, yes. It's this fellow called Horned Demon. It's because he dug out the laboratory that had been sealed for over a decade. He tossed and turned it into a mess. Yeah, so I tossed him into a mess. This isn't the main point. The main point is that we can try to get a relatively true understanding of the laboratory through him. Truth be told, this is the first time I've tried this move. Even though I've prepared for several hours in advance, it's still hard to tell the success rate. It's normal to have a bit of risk. Everyone wants to leave. But it's a bit too late. Luo Nan's voice fell. He didn't care about the changes in the expressions of the bidders in the auction house. The creaking, trembling, and scraping sounds of the booth beneath Luo Nan's feet clearly intensified. At the same time, the curtain wall also undulated and swayed. The lines of powder that formed the picture seemed to be shaking off. In the image of the curtain wall, Gong Qi and Jin Tong were fine on the two sides, but the horned demon in the middle was greatly distorted. The highland lakeside environment that existed in the background was similarly distorted. But while it was distorted, it was gradually dyed with other colors, as if by magic. The color of the curtain grew lighter, and the lines of the picture gradually grew deeper. It was natural and clear. It was as if the whistling of the wind and the gurgling of water could be heard. It wasn't as if there really was wind. It brushed past the direction of the curtain wall. There really was water. It flowed out from the cracks in the booth. The auction house was in chaos. Order nearly collapsed from the moment Luo Nan said, "It's too late. Let's not talk about how these rich and powerful people, experts, and security personnel tossed and turned." There was no doubt about it. The cool wind that carried the smell of grass in the wasteland and the running water that suddenly reached their ankles had already made contact with each and every one of them. Cries of alarm rang out without end. Some people even yelled at Luo Nan, telling him not to go too far with his jokes. In fact, there were still people in the auction house who felt that this was very likely a kind of load-free virtual environment brought about by some sort of brilliant technology. But no matter what they thought, this experience, which was formed from real or fake sensations, was this. It was as if people were sitting in a large boat that was already leaking water. They were sailing toward the lake shore that was depicted, displayed, and warped by the curtain wall. Right in front of them was the horned demon. He stared blankly at the boat as it sailed over. He suddenly laughed inexplicably. The corner of his mouth split open all the way to the back, all the way to the area behind his ears that couldn't be seen. Just like that, his cheeks were torn apart, his head was torn apart, and at the same time, his entire body was torn into pieces. The screams grew louder, but the scene before their eyes didn't change according to the people's will. The horned demon's body was torn apart. But fine sparks of electricity leaped between every torn piece of flesh, bone, and internal organs. Yes, it was just like how Luo Nan's pen moved. The sparks of electricity weaved and crisscrossed densely within the empty areas of the shattered limbs. It formed a faint, door curtain shape. In this way, a bewitching door was formed on the shore with flesh and bones as a support. The magneto-electric sparks formed a curtain. People moved toward this door. They could practically smell the stench of flesh and blood being torn apart. They got closer and closer to the densely woven sparks of electricity. Later on, the sparks of electricity leaped about to penetrate into their hearts and lungs. They pulled out the same components and fused them inside. Then, would their bodies be the same? Would they soon become the same as the horned demon? Fear quickly spread through the hearts of the 100 or so people present. The fear tightened, making it impossible for them to breathe. Their limbs went numb. As for whether it was the effects of suffocation or the consequences of being cut by the sparks of electricity, who knew? There were already security personnel who instinctively pulled out their guns, but they didn't have the courage to raise their guns and take aim. They were even absent-minded. Whether it was the rich, the experts, or the security personnel, their identities and values were all blurred at this moment. They were just helpless passengers on a broken ship that was about to sink. The ship was clearly about to reach the shore, but what they faced was an even more unknown and inexplicable terror. As the body of the ship moved forward, the door curtain, of interweaving sparks of electricity and fire on the bewitching door gradually split open from the center. It was hard to see the original shape of the horned demon as it opened and closed. Instead, a pitch-black background that was completely different from the scene at the lakeside of the wasteland was gradually revealed within the hollow of the skeleton. Luo Nan snapped his fingers and the curtain wall, that had no sense of existence, shook violently once more. This time, the powder on the surface really did rustle and fall. A large area of the central region was shattered into pieces. Then it turned into a large amount of dust particles and transformed into a whistling sandstorm within the pitch-black background. Chapter 1088. The sandstorm assaulted their faces. Right now, no one felt that this was a simple painting, and this was indeed not the case. A sandstorm was a more accurate description of an objective image, but the results of people perceiving the outside world were more or less different. Especially when the swirling grains of sand passed through the magnetic gate of flesh and bones to make direct contact with the outside world. Everything before everyone's eyes became pitted and incomplete. The wasteland lakeside, which had just been dyed in color and was approaching reality, suddenly became riddled with holes. Moreover, it had nothing to do with the impression that people were used to. These holes were the remnants left behind by the piercing and annihilation of the void. This scene was really hard to describe, and it exceeded the scope of most people's experience. In comparison, the wild donkeys that stopped by the lakeside had a more straightforward end. The change in the void covered the front of the lakeside, and this group of unlucky fellows was in this region. Countless bloody holes were gouged into the bodies of several dozen vigorous wild donkeys in a practically unconscious state. They didn't even manage to let out a few blood-curdling screams. There were even some who continued to move forward in a daze. They approached the lakeside and lowered their heads to drink water. And it was during this process that their flesh and blood split under the effects of the deep distortion. Their bodies collapsed, and they smashed into the water, creating a spray of blood and filthy water. This scene happened in front of the 100 or so rich people, experts, and security personnel that were forced to board the ship. They were really close now. The splattered flesh and blood mixed with the strong wind and salty water to form a wave of turbid dark mist. It assaulted the faces of the people in the front row. It was impossible to raise the screams any higher. Instead, some people fainted straight away, bringing with them tables, chairs, and cutlery. They smashed into the muddy waters of the lake. Yes, the broken ship had basically reached the shore. The exterior of the giant ship exhibition hall had completely turned into nothingness. The natural color of the sky had replaced the glorious lights of the venue. The distance between the central southern plateau of the old continent and the location of the jade light exceeded 12,000 kilometers. There was a time difference of 6 to 7 hours. It was only 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon here. Even though the sky was covered with dark clouds, it was still daytime. Luo Nan's figure appeared somewhat illusory and transparent under the light of the sky. At this moment, he was in the void region filled with craters and distortions. He was also beside the blood-stained lake shore. In fact, the most accurate location was the entrance to the dark world where the sandstorm was rolling. He was in front of the demonic door that was made of flesh and bones and constructed of magnetism, electricity, and fire. The door was still expanding, and light gradually entered. Or perhaps the original radiance seeped out from within, building a new curtain wall for Luo Nan. Moreover, it gradually deepened, possessing a clearer sense of space. It was precisely because of these lights that they formed a spatial cross-section in their field of vision, allowing people to see that the equipment on the original booth had already been moved in, and it seemed to have been properly arranged. This was indeed the most suitable area to place the equipment, and it was a more suitable scene than the auction booth. It was just that the situation was so urgent that most people wouldn't care about these details at all. All they knew was that although the broken ship had reached the shore, it was still moving forward and was no longer riding the current. In fact, it had never been, not at all. Only God knew how they got here and how they would continue. They didn't even know if they had crashed into it, or if the other side was pressing over. All they knew was that if this continued, this group of people would crash into the terrifying sandstorm behind the gate of magnetism and light. They would end up like a herd of wild donkeys strewn with corpses, or they would become rotten flesh mixed with the ripples of water and mud. "Stop the car! Stop the car!" someone screamed. "Apologies. There's a bit of an unexpected situation." Luo Nan, the driver, finally revealed his considerate side. He revealed a smile. "The degree of sealing here was barely acceptable in the past, but it's like this now. It's mostly due to the effects of the aftermath of the recent battle. But then again, isn't it more intuitive now?" In the eyes of the participants who had already logged in, Luo Nan's incorporeal shadow had an expression that became even more blurry. It was as if he was a remote projection of an outsider. Let's not talk about whether it was intuitive or not. This situation was far too F***king ironic. Clearly, Luo Nan didn't care about their thoughts. He stood in the center of the brand new, live booth, and was instead in the mood to talk. You can think of the situation behind the door as the collision of two spacetime. The laboratory is located at a certain point of the collision of spacetime. The specific direction of research is naturally what kind of spacetime structure is on the other side, as well as the problem of the spacetime structure itself. What was ejected just now was a spacetime fragment caused by a collision or some other reason. It's fine as long as everyone has an impression of it. This is a very important place. I'm just asking everyone to take a look. If I were to really send you in, it would likely cause an even greater disturbance in spacetime. I really can't bear to do it." Luo Nan's words made a few people relax. And at this time, the demonic gate behind Luo Nan had clearly expanded to its limits. It began to slowly retract, and the extent was quite large. This sort of change ignited the flames of hope from the bottom of everyone's hearts. Some of the more courageous people tried to communicate, shouting loudly, "Mr. Luo. Boss Luo. We already know our wrongs. Luo Nan laughed again before this sort of sound wave could form into a large scale. His gaze wasn't cast in this direction. He didn't point at anyone. Instead, there was a subtle feeling of dislocation. He seemed to say something, but his voice was weak. Not a single person present was able to hear him clearly. Some people became furious, not at Luo Nan, but at their utterly chaotic companions. "Boss Luo is going to speak. All of you shut your mouths." This was an extremely low attitude, but it was really useful in this sort of situation. A large portion of people really did shut their mouths, and then it spurred on the others. Everyone within the venue. Oh, right now they were at the edge of the saltwater lake on the plateau that was covered in blood. The group of people were as quiet as chickens. But when everyone cast their gazes forward, cast their gazes towards the location of Luo Nan's phantom, they first saw the demonic gate close. Then the phantom that bore all of their loathing, fear, and hope disappeared without a trace under the light of the sky. The silence continued for a few seconds. Everyone stared at Luo Nan, hoping that it was just a temporary fluctuation. But there was no change that met their expectations. There was nothing from start to finish. Screams and curses gushed out. There were a few of them, but they were soon forcefully suppressed by the surrounding people. On one hand, the strong winds of the wilderness brought along the faint roars of wild beasts. On the other hand, and more importantly, there was no longer Luo Nan's shadow in front of them. The scene of the wilderness was nearly completely restored, but there was still some sort of unnatural scene. The chaotic magneto-electric flames were still drifting disorderly among the remains of the horned demon. It seemed to be extinguished at any time, but it still existed. Even though the flickering and extinguishing electric flames were weak, they still pulled along some sort of throbbing power. It was like a noose that pierced through the depths of everyone's inner organs and even their souls. The tighter it tightened, the lakeside was restored to silence once more. Instead, the sounds of the wind and the roars grew louder and louder. Then finally, someone, perhaps a coward, perhaps an innocent person, began to cry. Truth be told, I'm a bit embarrassed by this scene. Luo Nan stood on the stage, still speaking in a tiresome tone. His sound waves stirred up echoes within the spacious and empty hall. My ability is really limited. I want to bring more people over, but I can't do it. It's quite hard to go back and forth. Let's leave it at that. Just like this, Luo Nan faced the empty venue. He extended his hand and made a grasping motion. Indeed, he didn't lift anything. The curtain wall behind him still faithfully reflected the scenery of the lakeside on the plateau. But following the conclusion of, let's leave it at that, the scene gradually faded away in color. It returned to the style of a sand painting sketch with powder lines. Then, it was as if it was wiped away by an invisible rag until it returned to nothingness. Following the erasing of the final traces, the real-time projection of 12,000 kilometers away was thus interrupted. Since this was the result of Luo Nan's control of his consciousness, it was as if his mind had completely forgotten about it. At this time, or perhaps a bit earlier, the consciousnesses of all the extraordinaries on the jadeite light pierced into the venue at practically the same time. The consciousnesses wandered within the spacious hall, but they were unable to capture any additional traces of existence. Practically everyone wanted to communicate with Luo Nan. But in the end, they had nothing to say under such special circumstances. Abner was one of the first extraordinaries to give up on the idea of communicating ahead of time. This was also because his phone was exploding with calls. The real-time signal of the auction venue transmitted scenes that defied common sense to the eyes of every relevant person in the world through many secret channels. The situation had already exploded. Abner maintained his silence. Romanus was in charge of answering the calls. This lasted for less than half a minute before the true high-level archons of the real world blew up. Abner's status was no lower than anyone else's, but this didn't mean that he could refuse to communicate while he was at the scene. It wasn't just Abner. Even Constance, Star Shaman, Black Lion, Wang Yong, and the others, who were nearby, wouldn't be able to escape. But even if Abner picked up the phone, what meaning would there be? What could he explain? What could he promise? What could he express? All he could do was act as a cushion in this rarely seen clamor of emotions from the high level of the entire world. Abner had sunk in, giving Romanus a bit of an opening. But this wasn't a chance for him to catch his breath. There were many more things he needed to do right now. He grabbed Star Shaman, who had just dealt with a round of calls. You contact Qiu Wanshan, I'll contact Dongsheng. No, Connie, it's better if you do it. There's also Yen City, I'll contact the Star Alliance Committee and request for the mobilization of the Air Force's rescue spacecraft. Because the living conditions in the highlands were too cruel, it wasn't suitable to build a super-large city. Therefore, the area around that area was an uninhabited area of dozens of square kilometers. Romanus could only expand the area further. Qiu Wanshan and Dongsheng were extraordinaires who guarded Ansheng and Spring City, and their influence could radiate to the highlands. Although there were no extraordinaires in Yen City, it was closer, and there might be a nearby reinforcement team. Coupled with the rescue spacecraft from the Star Alliance Committee, this was all the rescue force that could be mobilized in a short period of time. In any case, it was impossible to let a group of billionaires with a net worth of hundreds of billions or even trillions be wiped out in the wilderness in such a way. Any rational archon on Earth wouldn't allow it. Old Qiu, you're good at ordering people around. But are you sure that person won't cause any more trouble? Star Shaman, who had completed his assigned task, spat a timely manner. He used his chin to tap the screen. Mr. Who reverses time and space, is he done yet? It was just as Star Shaman said. The auction had already lost all meaning. Luo Nan spent a minute or two on the shattered and empty original booth. The curtain wall behind him had been wiped clean, and a new drawing actually appeared. No, it couldn't be considered new. It was a small reincarnation. Luo Nan's earliest drawing of the Pacific Ocean world map appeared once more. There were two markings representing the jadeite light and the highlands lakeside on it. There was also a connecting line between the 2 points that represented a length of 12,000 kilometers. Luo Nan coughed lightly. He faced the empty venue, and of course, there were still those diligent and conscientious working cameras. Thanks to modern technology, he didn't need any live cameras. He could just make do with a rock arm. He clearly wanted to say something, but who was he talking to? In a few breaths of time, new markings were added to the world map. There were many more this time. Anyone who had a slight understanding of modern world geography would immediately know that the vast majority of the markings were distributed in various major cities. Some had only one, some had 2 or 3, some had 4 or 5. The ones with more markings were squeezed together due to the small scale. If one were to think about the meaning behind it, it would be enough to make many people change their expressions in shock. Abner cut off the connection to an archon. His gaze swept across the markings. He ignored the markings that were gathered in various major cities. In the end, his gaze locked onto the ocean region far away from the cities and even the continents. Is Mao Zhenye in T-City? He seems to have returned to his little island. Ask him if he's there. Romanus responded. But before he could move, Abner shook his head at him. At the same time, Abner connected to the communication. Director Mao, your vacation is too long. The location is too monotonous. The death which sneered in the nothingness. What's the use of trying to show off at a time like this? Abner's expression didn't change. He simply communicated with Mao Zhenye before hanging up. He confirmed the authenticity of Romanus' information. He went back at noon today. He's been watching the live broadcast. The room entered a deathly silence once more. Speaking of which, Luo Nan's water vapor body was becoming more and more blurry and transparent under the high light. It made people understand that the method of distorting the distance between space and time must have consumed a considerable amount of energy. But so what? It was impossible to surpass the North Sea with Mount Tai. There was a fundamental difference. He faced the camera and used a casual attitude to organize his words. He said, "Thank you to everyone who is still paying attention. Everyone is quite scattered. But thanks to modern technology, I can communicate with you without any hindrance. There's no need to say too much under the current circumstances. But I've thought before, you guys are experts in making money from doing business. I'm more proficient in reversing space and time. The problem is that the two fields are too far apart. It's hard to avoid the fatigue of talking like chickens and ducks. So, some words need to be said in order to avoid misjudgments and to avoid playing dumb. Of course, it would be even better if I could find a resonance point. I think I've already found one. Everyone in the world pursues life and avoids death. I'm the same. What's different is that it's not as convenient for me to do things when everyone else does things. That's all." Luo Nan bowed towards the camera. He truly completed a middle school-style speech. Another second passed and the world map on the curtain wall was erased. Luo Nan's water vapor body was erased as well. There really was not a single person left in the venue. The live broadcast equipment was still working cautiously. But all it faced and transmitted was emptiness. The emptiness was rapidly expanding and spreading. It was a malevolent power that was unavoidable. Chapter 1089. Oh my God, he wants people to help him cover up this matter. Hee, old man's secret deed should be having a headache right now. How can he snatch back the limelight? Blood Demon paced back and forth in the room. His speed was uncertain. Perhaps it was just as he thought, troubled times, troubled times. Your Majesty, what do you think? The words of the body follow the heart. Skillful and convenient karma. Gaining equal wisdom in all laws. Being able to observe the actions of all sentient hearts. Knowing the truth of all impurities. Can you speak human words? Her Majesty Empress Wu laughed good-naturedly. You're becoming more and more professional. A professional charlatan, huh? Blood Demon ridiculed, but from these words, one could tell that he understood Her Majesty Empress Wu's meaning. What Blood Demon meant was that Luo Nan was no longer like before. He was no longer speaking profound and sophisticated words that normal people would find hard to understand. Instead, he was using skillful and convenient methods to stab at the point the target was most concerned about, the weakness they feared the most. This matter sounded simple, but it was just as Her Majesty Empress Wu said. To truly realize it required absolute magical power. On this point, Luo Nan pointed directly at life and death. He was skillful in observing people's hearts. After all, who wasn't afraid of death? But to be able to achieve such an effect, the power he displayed truly exceeded everyone's imagination. Blood Demon made an assumption. He placed himself on the opposite side of Luo Nan. He didn't think for too long before he felt like his brain was about to explode. Perhaps right now, directly over here. No, it should be firing nuclear warheads at Ban City. This is the fastest way to resolve this. Zhang Yingying glared at him when she heard this. But on the other side, Her Majesty Empress Wu nodded in agreement. You're insightful. Yingying, make a relevant contingency plan for the next step. Even if you don't need it tonight, you might need it in the future. Huh? Zhang Yingying was startled at first, but she soon grew serious. Her Majesty Empress Wu put away her scroll and slowly got up. Where are you going? What's the point of staying here? Her Majesty Empress Wu's gaze swept across the image of the empty scene. Then she left. Hey, Your Majesty, hold on. I have something to discuss. I have something to discuss with you. The blood demon puppet chased after them, but it suddenly turned around and grinned at Meng Chong, who was standing aside quietly. Hey, when the core is tied up, everybody has to test the periphery in the corners. Are you the core or the periphery? Have you figured it out yet? Meng Chong's expression was solemn as he bowed to the blood demon to express his gratitude. Let's not talk about whether or not this analogy was appropriate, but the reminder was very timely. The most important thing was for the relevant parties to promptly discuss their contingency plans and make a response when Luo Nan was stirring up such a storm. Her Majesty Empress Wu and Blood Demon went out one after the other. Half a minute later, Meng Chong also went out in search of a private place to contact his cult. Only Zhang Yingying and Bai Xinyan were left in the room. The latter was still hugging Zhang Yingying. Their cheeks were touching each other's shoulders, and it seemed like they were still tipsy. Nuclear bomb. Zhang Yingying frowned. She considered both the contingency plan and the actual possibility and threat. Bai Xinyan said softly, the blood demon is exaggerating. Right, I think so too. In reality, with the hundreds and thousands of weapons in this era, if you really want to get rid of an extraordinary, there are relatively more economical methods. For example, you can go from destroying a city to destroying a city district. If you put it this way, doesn't it suddenly become easier to accept? Screw you. Even the boss won't be able to protect you if you keep courting death. Bai Xinyan laughed softly. Her warm and moist breath sprayed onto Zhang Yingying's neck. Actually, if we start from this line of thought, the two of the Order of Amaterasu don't really want to turn the experimental fields of Ban City into a sea of fire. However, if it's just abandoning a trade zone far away on Beishan Lake, they can still do it. After all, this is the best opportunity in the short term. Of course, they need to have the awareness to pull chestnuts out of the fire for others. I'm curious right now. Do the true gods and the Pope have the awareness to contribute to the capitalists of the world who tremble with fear? Those capitalists don't have the qualifications. But from a different perspective, from a different person, do they have the qualifications? Zhang Yingying's body stiffened when she heard Bai Xinyan's words. Then she fiercely jumped up. Luckily, Bai Xinyan dodged in time. Otherwise, she wouldn't have her chin crooked. Hey! Why didn't you say so earlier? That's just a guess, idiot. We have to be on guard even if there's a 1 in 1,000 chance. Zhang Yingying gave Luo Nan a call, but the call didn't go through. She rushed out of the room in 2 or 3 steps. Perhaps she went to look for someone, or perhaps she went to discuss things with Her Majesty Empress Wu. In the end, Bai Xinyan was the only one left in the room. She sat on the sofa and spread out her arms. She did her best to spread them out and said to herself, idiot. This is all metaphysics. If you believe it, it might not happen. If you don't believe it, it might happen. Bai Xinyan suddenly laughed in spite of herself. She gasped for a breath of air, stood up shakily, and walked outside. Right now, the exhibition hall was already in chaos. Something had happened to the truly important figures, and the periphery would inevitably be impacted. Bai Xinyan wasn't interested in these things. She continued to walk forward, slowly walking out of the exhibition hall. She entered the express passageway and left Area C, heading toward the bow of the ship. She didn't feel anything in the sealed exhibition hall, but on her way, her line of sight passed through some open areas. She saw the night sky outside, and she discovered that the jade light had already sunk into a certain foggy area at some unknown time. The originally brilliant lights could only be painted with gorgeous patches of color within the fog. She couldn't see the sky. She couldn't see the sea. Not a single figure could be seen on the deck area. Even if there were people, they would basically be completely submerged within the fog. On the other hand, those who were still lingering on the deck at this time had courage that far exceeded that of ordinary people. Bai Xinyan's feet didn't hesitate at all. She stepped onto the fog-filled open-air area. She arrived at the pool deck. It was the place where Luo Nan and the other extraordinaries chatted and conversed in the afternoon. Luo Nan was still in the middle of the pool, debugging that ox demon. But right now, there wasn't a single person in sight. Was she not here? Zhang Yingying didn't come either. Bai Xinyan shook her head. It didn't matter. It was just a guess. Mistakes were inevitable. She didn't have a clear goal in coming here. It was just that her value on the cruise ship was close to zero at this stage, so she came here to find a sense of existence. Since there was no one here, then. A phone call suddenly came in. Bai Xinyan raised her eyebrows when she saw the caller ID. She immediately picked up the call. Oh my, it's boyfriend Sang. You actually have the time to make a call. Your time management is top-notch. I'm borrowing your place to hide. I also want to ask you something. How's the progress of your relationship with Boss Luo? Wang Yu's voice was transmitted over along with the sound of the waves of the ocean. Is this something a boyfriend should ask? I'm really ashamed. Honestly speaking, I'm actually a bit bewildered and excited. But even if I don't ask now, someone will ask in a bit. Huh? Didn't you notice that your mentor is also on the one-way trip to the plateau? It looks like he trusts you. He's complaining and angry. His brain is a bit fried. Otherwise, he wouldn't waste so much effort to compete with others in terms of authority and forcefully call me. Of course, he'll be begging you later. I can help you transfer the call. You're welcome. Hey. What a mess. Bai Xinyan stuck her fingers into her phone screen. She stayed in the dense mist for a few minutes, her hair getting wet. She was just about to tidy up her hair when the gaudy and irritating functions of modern communications came into play. Wang Yu established a three-way communication channel and then exited the group chat. This way, Bai Xinyan didn't even have the chance to refuse. She called her mentor. Blanche, I need your help. The senior expert, Dr. Clay's tone was still relatively calm. He called Bai Xinyan by her nickname, as if it was a daily call. He didn't seem like Wang Yu's brain was fried. But the reception of the communicator was too good. It was to the extent that the weeping and cursing of the surrounding people could be faintly heard. Bai Xinyan also spoke in a normal tone of greeting. Teacher, your luck today isn't good. It's not completely bad. At least there's still signal in the no man's land. But this bit of luck ends here. I feel that Luo Nan just vented his anger. There won't be any more, thank you for your consolation. I also have this kind of hope, but the problem we're facing right now is more direct. Dr. Clay said something to someone. It seemed that he was avoiding the chaotic flow of people. He subconsciously sighed. The saltwater lake area we're in is the endpoint of many inland rivers. It's also an important water source for the surrounding wild animals and mutants. It's also a place to forage for trace elements. This is a good place to study ecology, but it's absolutely not suitable for a large group of people to stay. I can already see a carnivorous bird circling in the air. Its mutant characteristics are very clear. Look at its sharp beak. It's absolutely not a scavenger. Dr. Clay spoke faster and faster. He could no longer conceal his nervousness. There are nearly 150 people here. There aren't more than 20 armed personnel. All of them carry light weapons. There are also very few ability users. It will be a disaster if we enter the hunting circle of the mutants. The rescue team should have already gone over. Bai Xinyan knew that this wasn't enough to make people feel at ease. She spoke a sentence that couldn't be avoided. How can I help you? But I need to say something first. Luo Nan probably won't care about the matters over there. Even if he does, I don't have much weight on his side. I just need a suggestion, Blanche. Dr. Clay didn't mind Bai Xinyan's evasive words. Frankly speaking, my mind is in a mess right now. The only suggestion I can give myself is to immediately undergo a mutant transformation upon returning. But right now, all of this is meaningless, right? I understand what you're saying. Bai Xinyan maintained basic respect for this instructor and collaborator. She muttered to herself for a few seconds before responding, first of all, I feel that under the protection of 20 well-trained professional security personnel, your chances of survival should be quite high as long as your organizational strength can keep up. It shouldn't be a problem for the vast majority of people to hold out until the rescue team arrives. I don't reject probability, but the problem is that I don't see the corresponding degree of organization. Most people are scared to death. Their thoughts and physical strength aren't in a normal state. I suspect that traveling through space and time will cause unknown damage to the bodies and minds of ordinary people. I understand. Bai Xinyan laughed silently. If you're really worried about some accident or uncontrollable situation happening, and you're willing to take a gamble, why not follow someone closely? Is Mrs. Kawahara Machiko of the Toyama auction house there? Kawahara? She's there. She's there. She's actually there. Dr. Clay spent 2 seconds to confirm. The reason why Machiko Kawahara was able to find the target so quickly within the chaotic crowd of over 100 people was because Machiko Kawahara was far too conspicuous. She stood at the outermost edge of the crowd, all alone. It was as if she had been isolated by everyone. It was as if she had cut herself off from the group. The lake water lapped against the shore, already submerging her feet and calves. Her stockings were also splashed with specks of mud. She felt as if she was stuck in the silt of the riverside, unable to extricate herself. Follow her closely. Dr. Clay was a bit hesitant. From a professional perspective, Machiko Kawahara's position was simply the worst and most dangerous area in the surrounding area. She was far away from the crowd, and she was exposed to the shallow regions of the lake. She was exposed to the threat of predators and even mutants that could appear at any time. If something happened, she would be the most likely target to be sacrificed. I don't know what you've seen, teacher. And I'll say this in advance. I'm not basing my judgment on your environment. I'm basing my judgment on Mr. Luo Nan's usual way of doing things. I believe this is the most important reason why you need me to give you a suggestion. Dr. Clay took a deep breath. Yes. That's right. Bai Xinyan continued to speak. My judgment is that although Mr. Luo Nan is a simple-minded person in many matters and doesn't understand human emotions, he is essentially someone who is extremely meticulous in his emotions. He is a person who is very considerate of others. Of course, the vast majority of people don't have this qualification. You guys aren't one of them. But there is a special case. He treats those who work as tools for him with preferential treatment. I feel that Ms. Machiko Kawahara can be classified as such. Of course, this is just my judgment and conjecture. Believing it might not happen. If you don't believe him, it might happen. Dr. Clay took the initiative to complete his sentence. He thought even more. We don't know the range of that person's divine blessing. If it's a single target blessing, then I'll be in great danger. Maybe. Before Bai Xinyan could finish speaking, she heard Dr. Clay yell loudly, "Ms. Kawahara, it's very dangerous over there. Retreat." Sure enough, the top researchers were all doers. 2 or 3 seconds after Dr. Clay's yell, a cacophony of screams and sporadic gunshots rang out. Bai Xinyan laughed. She didn't hesitate and hung up the phone. Dr. Clay didn't need any other suggestions at this time. Whether or not he could return to Luoyang City's laboratory alive depended on his luck. Bai Xinyan wanted to leave, but she was startled the moment she turned around. Applause rang out. A fat figure with a bulging belly came out from the exit she had just passed through. The analysis just now was very brilliant. "Miss Bai, aren't you interested in verifying it?" "Mr. Black Lion?" Bai Xinyan was a bit surprised to see the newcomer, but she quickly came to her senses. "You're also looking for someone?" Black Lion grinned, revealing a mouthful of golden teeth. "No, I'm here to dispel doubts." Chapter 1090. Dispel my doubts. Bai Xinyan's attitude was very cautious. "There's no need to rush. Speaking of which, I didn't pay much attention to the plateau wilderness. But after listening to Miss Bai's analysis, I feel that there really is something going on. Miss Bai, you have the pearl of wisdom in your hands. I want to verify it. Shall we go together?" As an extraordinary, the king of Black Africa, and one of the most powerful magistrates in the world, Black Lion had an absolute psychological advantage when facing Bai Xinyan. This was not something that could be changed by his amiable attitude. Even though his tone was one of discussion, Bai Xinyan could not refuse. While they were talking, a halo of light spread out beside the two of them. The colorful light struck the surrounding chaotic mist. At first, it was hazy and mottled, but the projection quickly adapted and formed a relatively clear image. The scenery on the screen was clearly that of the plateau wilderness, saltwater lakeside, and the chaotic one-way group. Bai Xinyan was even able to see Dr. Clay, who was in a relatively more forward position. Bai Xinyan was able to see Dr. Clay. Of course, if one were to use the saltwater lake as a reference, the one at the front was Kawahara Machiko, who was knee-deep in the lake water and mud. And right in front of her was a monster with a malevolent horn. It was half in the water, and it was quickly approaching. Clearly, this was the source of the crowd's panic. The monster had thick armor and sharp teeth. It was a bit like a crocodile. There were blade-like bone spurs on its forehead. They were like hard fins that cut through the water. They split the water surface and quickly closed in. The projected image was a bit shaky, but it was not just because the photographer was panicking. Upon closer inspection, one could see that there were clear traces of technology splicing on the image. It was probably a combination of the people recording the scene and some low-altitude satellite images to form the effect of a live broadcast. And judging from the time of Bai Xinyan's call, there might be some delay. Even though the conditions were shabby, the only people who could watch such a real-time, live stream, at this stage were the Archons, who had extremely high authority like Black Lion. Perfect timing. Black Lion rubbed his stomach and turned to look at Bai Xinyan. "You said this woman would be fine." Before Bai Xinyan could open her mouth, a figure stood out from the group of one-way tour groups that were retreating in panic. It was Dr. Clay, who was moving in the opposite direction. With extraordinary courage, the man of action took another 2 steps forward. Then, he took advantage of his expertise and shouted, "You're a professional. It's the Highland Water Arrow Dragon. The water arrows shot out by its hollow bone spurs are poisonous." Whether or not it would work was another matter. Attitude was very important. The Black Lion chuckled. Just as he was laughing, the water arrow dragon in the projection had already assumed an attacking stance. In the next second, it sprayed, but what it sprayed was not the so-called poisonous water arrow, but a flash. The flash of light exploded in the middle of the hollow bone spur that should have shot out the poison water arrow, forming a dense electric magnetic fire that instantly proliferated and spread. The water arrow dragon did not have any vocal organs. When it suddenly opened its huge mouth, 3 to 4 rows of densely packed teeth could be seen. They were also shrouded in electric light and magnetic fire. It made one wonder if the inside of its body was also filled with the same power. This was not what Dr. Cly had warned about, and it would not be the same. Only now did most of the people suddenly realize that this scene, or more accurately, why did the flashing electric flames look so familiar? Only aptitude users like Black Lion and Baisinyan could see the sequence of events clearly from the projected image. The flash of light did not come from the water arrow dragon at all. It was a reverse impact. The flash of light passed by Dr. Cly and brushed past the shoulder of Michiko Kawahara, who had already fallen to the shore. It hit the bone spur fin on the forehead of the water arrow dragon. It originated from the wreckage of the magnetic light portal on the shore that no one dared to set foot on. Only God knew what the mechanism was, but it really seemed like there was a magnetic induction that attracted the electric magnetic fire and accurately hit the target. The water arrow dragon's thick and long tail swung up, exploding water and mud all over the sky. Then, the cycle repeated itself. This was not hunting, but it was struggling. The flashing electric magnetic fire wrapped around this aberrant species. It was dazzling, almost making people think that another portal had opened. It was not. It was just that in its suppressed and intense struggle, its originally fierce and tyrannical body began to distort and deform. The degree of distortion became greater and greater. In the end, the scales disintegrated and tore apart, exposing the bright red flesh. It also sizzled under the electric fire and magnetic light, twitching and deforming violently. Sometimes, there was even a sudden huge stretch, as if all the flesh and blood under the broken scales were forcibly extracted. Is there something inside? The Black Lion subconsciously ground his black gold teeth. He was quite engrossed in watching. Baisinyan narrowed her eyes slightly, but this was to adjust her eyelids that were twitching due to the fluctuations in her heart. She did not respond, because she did not know how to answer. But she did see that as time passed, the flesh that had been forcibly twitched and twisted did indeed faintly pinch into a vague outline. What does it look like? The Black Lion asked again. Baisinyan still did not speak, but her mind was basically clear. It was somewhat like a fetus in a mother's womb. Or to be more direct, it was like a curled-up humanoid creation. Following this outline, it seemed that the lines and boundaries of the limbs and torso could be seen. She could even see the corresponding stretching and struggling movements. Before the conclusion could be reached here, there was another bang in the sky. This time, the spliced view of the live broadcast was unable to keep up in time. It took a second or two for it to react. But thanks to the spliced view, the fake live broadcast used several times the speed to act as a connecting segment. It basically restored the situation at the time. In the sky, the aberrant bird that Dr. Clay had mentioned was twice the size of an ordinary eagle. It had been circling and approaching without end. Then it suddenly exploded, turning into a splatter of blood and gore. No one was able to clearly see what species it was. In the blink of an eye, the blood and gore were restrained and kneaded by an incorporeal power. It was as if some figure was about to emerge from within. It was practically the same situation as the water arrow dragon on the surface of the lake. This. What is this? This is a good thing, a good thing. That Luo Nan. Mr. Luo Nan doesn't wish for anything to happen. Something big to happen. These words weren't wrong. After all, the two mutants that posed the greatest threat to humanity had suddenly been obliterated. Even though the process was a bit bloody, the result was good. It wouldn't be too much to expand on this a bit, right? Many people on the one-way group revealed expressions of joy. They communicated with each other in whispers, and they used the satellite signal of the wasteland to call for external help. They were much more confident now. The professional security personnel at the scene finally took advantage of this time to catch their breaths. They began to play their role. They held a meeting and began to discuss how to get the big shots, rich people, and experts to gather and arrange their positions. This was to facilitate the follow-up security work. During this time, Dr. Clay even made a special trip to the lakeside. He helped Kawahara Machiko up and brought her back. This lady was covered in mud and was in a sorry state, but she received a lot less cold glances. Everything was progressing in a good direction. This sort of mood reached its peak when a high-speed drone appeared in the sky. Very soon, a well-connected big shot announced that this was a mobile troop from Yen City in the wilderness. They had been ordered to send reinforcements here. Looking at the wings, it was obviously a model of armed forces. This meant that the conventional forces of the civilized world had formed a solid support force. Cheers rang out. The drone hovered in the sky and gradually approached. Many people on the ground also waved in the direction of the drone. No matter what the process was, they finally saw hope. Bang! A low-frequency sharp sound suddenly rang out. The drone high in the sky suddenly shook, and without any follow-up reaction, it directly exploded into a ball of fire. A rain of fire fell from the sky, causing everyone to scream and cover their heads to avoid the danger. Fortunately, the impact of the explosion pushed most of the debris away. It streaked over people's heads and smashed into the edge of the area. The largest piece happened to hit the lakeside area, causing the surface of the lake to burn. Oh! Black Lion sighed, as if he was watching an exciting drama. However, in the highland wilderness tens of thousands of kilometers away, the members of the one-way group really broke down. Someone shouted again, "Over there, over there." The so-called over there was the lakeside. Electric light and magnetic fire lingered there, and now they were wrapped in the fireball. It was like a furnace, causing the mass of twisted flesh and blood to continue melting and coalescing. So much so that the human silhouette inside became clearer and clearer. Black Lion and Baisinyan were not the only spectators watching from afar. More and more people in the panicked scene noticed this. TSK, it really looks like the work of Brother Luo Nan, Black Lion commented. Such a scene was really like a painter or sculptor hiding in the invisible, using flesh and blood as the material to continuously paint. Is this the divine grace you were talking about? Then what was drawn was the angel under his seat. Black Lion guessed with great interest, but as he spoke, the smile on his fat face faded. Baisinyan turned her head to glance at him, then quickly withdrew her gaze. She still did not speak. In the blink of an eye, another light explosion occurred on the lake. Some of the excess flesh and blood were expelled, erupting into a thin layer of bloody mist. The so-called angel walked out of the bloody mist. His body was naked, and his face was clear and emotionless. The answer was clearly placed in front of him, but Black Lion still remained silent. During this time, the water arrow dragon's scaly outer shell was disassembled and smelted in the magnetic fire, forming a rough armor similar to the exoskeleton armor's silhouette. It was used as clothing, wrapped around the angel's body, making it seem more like a living person. Jin Tong. Black Lion squeezed this name out from the cracks between his teeth. It must be said that this was not the first time this dead extraordinary had appeared, but to be able to appear in such a manner still made one's heart feel mixed emotions. After Jin Tong took form and appeared, he did not make any other movements. He just raised his head towards the sky. Many people's gazes followed him upwards. In the sky, the magnetic fire within the smoke flickered and extinguished, and another figure appeared. This figure was a bit more illusory than Jin Tong. It was faintly discernible, but its face was still clear. Gong Qi. Gong Qi also looked down. These two former extraordinaries, one high and one low, stared at each other across the air. During this time, the flesh and blood of the surrounding wild donkey corpses were like the two mutants that had collapsed. They began to squirm and twist, and under the catalysis of the electromagnetism fire, they formed indistinct lines of blood. The lines of blood gathered together and were cast towards Jin Tong and Gong Qi. The others looked at each other in dismay when they saw this scene. Some people came to a sudden realization, stomped their feet and cursed, "It's Luo Nan's." Before they could finish speaking, the person next to them forcefully covered their mouth. The range of the electromagnetism fire was clearly increasing. It appeared and disappeared in the air. It wasn't very frequent, but due to its powerful decomposition and catalysis function, it gave people the feeling that it had formed an inescapable net. It had trapped these 100 or so unlucky bastards who had nothing but wealth and technology. It was hard to say when a misfire would occur. No drones or other man-made objects would appear in the following period of time. Even if there were, they would probably stay far away from this area. What happened before was absolutely not an accident. It wasn't that no wild beasts and mutants had tried to enter this area, but they were struck by the electromagnetism fire before they could approach. They were torn apart, warped, and remolded. All living creatures turned into clay and clay. They became materials for the two extraordinaries, or perhaps the extraordinary figurines. These two bizarre existences grew more and more alive. It also caused the people in this area, who were temporarily the exception, to grow more and more pale. No matter what the reason was, no matter what the design was, the people present and those who weren't present found it hard to forget the leaping electromagnetism fire before their eyes. Some people couldn't forget the images that were pieced together within the electromagnetism fire. Some people couldn't forget the fate of having their souls captured and made into figurines. Even in death, they couldn't free themselves. There were also some people who grew more and more clear about the current situation. From beginning to end, nothing else had ever dominated their fates. There was only Luo Nan's will. Let them live. Let them die. Let them live. Even death might not be the end of all troubles. Time slowly passed. The people were unable to make any effective movements within this tangible and intangible net. During this period of time, some people were on the verge of collapsing completely, but there were also people whose minds grew clearer and clearer. For example, Michiko Kawahara. Michiko Kawahara had survived the edge of death, but she was no longer able to reflect her image. She had lived in the state of clay for a period of time, but now she let out a long breath. She took off her suit and used the lining of her expensive, custom-made coat. She did her best to wipe the dirt off her hands and face. She tied up her hair a bit, recovering the image of a strong woman with difficulty. Then she turned her head to look at Dr. Clay, who had just pulled her up. As for Dr. Clay, this man of action, he also turned his gaze. Truth be told, he felt that this scene was preposterous. But he thought back to Bai Xinyan's words. Of course, the most important thing was Luo Nan's actions after entering the scene. Suddenly, his thoughts became clear. Michiko Kawahara's gaze gave him one final stirring. The two formed an effective tacit understanding at this moment. Michiko Kawahara pursed her lips into a smile. "Doctor, are you interested in this?" These words broke through all of Dr. Clay's apprehensions. He grinned, suddenly raised his hand high, and shouted loudly. 10 million. 10 million credits. Chapter 1091. Dr. Clay's actions were far too abrupt and absurd. Under such circumstances, the surrounding people were confused for a time. 10 million was a small amount to most of the people present. But what was the point? Soon, Dr. Clay's finger pointed at the location of the Jin Tong on the lake. He added more concrete information. "I want this one. Cash transfer after tax." A few key words piled together and finally stimulated everyone's train of thought. Perhaps most people were not thorough enough, but there were some who reacted quickly. For example, Mr. Luo Nan had repeatedly called out the man with two beauties in his left and right arms. He suddenly jumped up from the ground and extended his arms to the sky. He even spun in circles in the direction of the gong opening. 100 million. 100 million. I want this one. Such a bidding war was suspected of driving up the price, but the atmosphere became lively. Experts and tycoons all had leaders. No matter how confused the others were, they all came to a sudden realization. That's right. Luo Nan had said that the gong opening and the Jin Tong were added to the auction. Since they were auction items, they naturally had to bid. Otherwise, how could they be considered cooperative? How could they show their attitude? Even now, there were still many people who did not know what these two things were. They did not know what use they had in their hands. But they absolutely would not let this opportunity slip by. Compared to the auction items, compared to money, their lives were more valuable, right? Moreover, they had to listen to their words. That young Mr. Luo had said that he was heavily in debt and that he relied on lecturing for a living. Such a capable person had to live his days in poverty. Everyone saw this. How could they not feel guilty? In just a few breaths of time, a nest of ungrateful people had hot tears in their eyes. They raised their arms and cheered loudly, causing the number of gold coins that had just been revealed to increase exponentially. During this period of time, some people had a flash of inspiration. They felt that their personal financial resources were limited and their contributions were insufficient. They simply huddled together and formed a temporary alliance to bid together. This caused others to imitate them one after another. In a short amount of time, the two auction items were raised to over 700 million. It looked like they could break through the 1 billion mark at any time. Auctioning or fighting with your life? That's the question. Black Lion grinned, not concealing his ridicule at all. But the real problem is that the lives of these people can't compare to those two masterpieces, even though they look like half-finished products. As he spoke, Black Lion made another call. Hello, is your phone auction line still there? So straightforward. The Black Lion looked back at Bai Xinyan and complained, someone is more anxious than me. As he spoke, he turned the projection into picture-in-picture mode and connected to the auction house's signal. The auction hall was supposed to be empty, and it was indeed empty. However, at this time, the lights at the edge of the booth flickered and there was a ringtone. It was the light for the telephone auction. Someone was bidding, and it had nothing to do with the reason of saving his life. Are there so many bored fellows like me? Black Lion said, but he did not hesitate to use his authority to join the bidding. Bai Xinyan pursed her lips slightly. She looked at the projection that was split on the surface but unified in substance. She looked at the arms that were waving vigorously by the shore of the saltwater lake. She looked at the flickering lights in the auction hall. She had been in the room when Luo Nan and Blood Demon had been conversing. She knew the cause and effect of the matter. She knew that this scene was actually caused by Blood Demon's wild imagination. However, even Blood Demon himself would not have thought that Luo Nan would actually use such a method to draw cards. He would distort life. At the very least, he would distort the form of existence of life. On the surface, the Black Lion merely displayed a deep interest. However, beneath this deep interest, what were his deep psychological feelings like? Was it that he grieved for his own kind? The fox grieved for the rabbit's death. If the Black Lion was like this, what about the other extraordinaries, the most powerful group in the world? Did Luo Nan not think about the consequences? Bai Xinyan was not worried. She was just deeply curious. Black Lion was a bit free after a round of bidding at this time. He turned his head to ask her, Miss Bai, according to your understanding, should we think deeper or shallower about Brother Luo Nan's actions? What does it mean to be deep? What does it mean to be shallow? The Black Lion knew that she was asking a question he already knew the answer to, but he still said a few more words. If he thinks deeper, then he has an even deeper calculation, layer upon layer. We have yet to capture his true goal. If he thinks shallow, then he actually doesn't think too much. It's just that we have overlooked some problems. The Black Lion should be said to have thought deeper for things to reach this point. Everyone thought deeper. Of course, Bai Xinyan would not say this. She just combed the hair in front of her forehead and smiled. In short, it's just that we don't know. The Black Lion shook his head. This doesn't mean that we don't know. No, I think that because we don't know, we don't know. What do you mean? Well, it wouldn't be appropriate to continue talking about this. Relax. Secrets don't spread to 6 ears. The Black Lion spoke carelessly without sincerity, but then he suddenly paused. Yes, it really isn't appropriate right now. Bai Xinyan subconsciously followed the Black Lion's line of sight and looked back. She saw a figure faintly discernible within the thick fog that pervaded the air. It was floating above the pool. It seemed as if it would become clearer, but it also seemed as if it could melt into the depths of the fog at any time. Luo Nan. When did he come? Bai Xinyan's heart skipped a beat. Luo Nan did not pay attention to this side. He just quietly and attentively looked at the clouds in the sky. He was alienated from his surroundings. It was like the colorful scenes around the Black Lion and Bai Xinyan. They were just projections of transcoded information streams. However, lightning could be seen flowing around his body and within the clouds and mist. There were crackling sounds. Although Bai Xinyan was 20 to 30 meters away, she still felt her face go slightly numb. It was as if an electric current had passed through her. I suddenly understand a bit. The Black Lion subconsciously took 2 steps forward and muttered, I can't figure out this little brother's foundation, so I can't figure out his pursuits. I don't know his pursuits. I can't figure out his goals and thoughts. This is the extraordinary power that reconstructed Gong Qi and Jin Tong. At this moment, it was hard to tell if lightning was flickering in the depths of the Black Lion's eyes or if fire was bursting out of the Black Lion's eyes. He did not conceal the desire and greed in his heart at all. Finally, Luo Nan seemed to have sensed this. He turned his face. The Black Lion grinned and waved at Luo Nan. Luo Nan just looked at him quietly. His thoughts naturally fluctuated and his will flowed through the air. The Black Lion was an example. A good example. He was one of the hundreds and thousands of people who revolved their thoughts and wills around the electro-optic magnetifier. Luo Nan did not necessarily need to see them. He just needed to sense them. Naturally, he could use this to turn their wills into magnetized iron powder. The magnetic field of Luo Nan's existence caused them to rustle and tremble. This situation was similar to what Mr. Bai had said. The psychic technique needed to capture the magnetization effect and the Heavenly Yuan Empire's psychic core interference. However, it seemed to be quite appropriate to match the soul magnetization of the magnetized mica jellyfish. Upon closer inspection, it was nothing more than the difference in degree and level, the result of initiative and passiveness. Although the saying, of the same origin, but different origins, all streams return to the origin, was merely an approximate solution obtained from the laziness of human thought and infinite simplification, there was indeed a reason behind it. At the very least, it could break through the barriers of knowledge in a certain domain and level, achieving the effect of connecting in one breath. At the very least, at this moment, this penetrative sense swept away a considerable portion of the superfluous information flow that Luo Nan mobilized. This caused his state of mind to become all the more pure and clear. And the more it was like this, whether it was on the level of worldly wisdom or in the domain of extraordinary strength, Luo Nan's magnetization power became purer and more powerful. The effects it formed became more and more direct. Luo Nan felt that the conditions were sufficient. The most powerful, wealthy, and relevant professionals in the world. These people, who were possibly the most assertive in the world, were bent by tyrannical strength and confused by inconceivable changes. They completely followed Luo Nan's design train of thought. The energy squeezed out could be completely applied to the current modification project of the large magnetized mica production line. It could be used in the construction of the petri dish. It could be used to add bricks and tiles and inject raw materials into the petri dish. In comparison, this was even more suitable than Ox Ghost's Tree of Nothingness. It was even more suitable than the Poseidon version of the belief system that he had yet to borrow. It wasn't strength or thickness. It was a pure and appropriate design of the environment. The lacking structure of the petri dish on the large magnetized mica production line could be seen rapidly constructing and multiplying at a visible rate. Regardless of whether they were present or not, all of them had been magnetized. Among the targets that had been magnetized were those extremely fine, tiny, and even extraordinary powerhouses. The electric fire that was hard to observe quickly flickered and extinguished. And within this special magnetic field, it gradually began to interact. Though there were thousands of mountains and thousands of miles of oceans, these extremely fine electric fires possessed the nature of distorting and piercing through space and time. They also relied on the frame of Luo Nan's soul cloak. Whether it was 100 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers, or 10,000 kilometers, they all possessed an astonishing tendency and synergy. They resonated and resonated. They echoed with each other from a distance. They tempered and tempered each other. Though it was not visible, Luo Nan's level of knowledge and understanding was 10 times, 100 times more intense and turbulent than what the huge gales and waves of the ocean could display. And amidst such intense changes, the mica, which was closely blended with the clouds and ocean, began a process of frequent replacement. It was like a crazily molting snake. Normal metamorphoses were no longer able to satisfy its restlessness. It smashed itself against hard rocks, riddled with scars and badly mangled flesh. At the same time, it ate in a frenzy to replenish its nutrients. Its belly swelled up and its body deformed. The vast sea surrounding the jadeite light was affected by the mica's feeding. The believers behind the petri dish of Ox Ghost all experienced disturbances. In comparison, the former was a bit more berserk. It was unknown how many marine life forms in the shallow and deep seas inexplicably disintegrated and collapsed. Actually, the situation around the two extraordinary figurines on the plateau was of the same nature. The latter was a bit more gentle in comparison, but it still possessed a deep warping effect. It was unknown how many believers of Ban City would have nightmares for some time to come. And it was under this berserk and warping situation that the new structure built upon the old framework of rules gradually transformed into an even clearer outline. It had long since surpassed Luo Nan's earliest designs and entered a completely new domain. And Luo Nan felt very good about it. This was not the first time he had done something like this, whether actively or passively. Altar spiderwebs, Luo Nanqi, daytime nightmare, and even the perfect mirror image. He repeatedly scattered, permeated, interfered, and warped. At the same time, he received all sorts of feedback, including a cut, replenishment, pollution, and excess. But no matter which one it was never like what he was doing right now. He possessed a complete train of thought while possessing a clear vision. He even had a clear arrangement for the result. He was unprecedentedly clear and clear. What he was stirring right now was the muddy flow of chaotic and changeable emotions. It was incorporeal thoughts and thoughts. But he was indeed conducting a precise, experimental production. The expected results and possible errors were reflected in every change in the details. Even though he was unable to control everything, he was able to make it so that he was well aware of everything. Right now, Luo Nan wasn't too clear on whether or not the first beam of magnetic light had taken form. This was because the marvelousness of the pinnacle of subtlety exceeded the limits of his own observation before it had accumulated to a certain scale. But at the same time, the structure of the mica had gradually gained an unprecedented liveliness. During the painful transformation, the structure of the mica took the initiative to stretch its body between the sea and the sky. It gathered clouds and rain, stirring up enormous waves, and made contact with this world. It experienced a rather novel sensation of touch. It quickly absorbed and integrated the complex information of the external world. It was clear what was related to it and what could be entered. From Luo Nan's perspective, the hazy mist between the sea and the sky had already wrapped the jadeite light within. It was released, as if it was swallowing and spitting, as if it was playing with it. Luo Nan looked inside this metal box on the sea. He looked at the life forms, whether strong or weak, but they were all gorgeous and colorful. He looked at how they converged and operated on a special level. He was curious and drooling with desire. It also seemed that they could rely on their innate instincts to carefully nurture and flavor them, to attempt to make them more delicious. Was he thinking too much? The same situation occurred in every location of the entire world where believers still existed. The cloak remained, and it was a region that was fully integrated with the mica structure. Xia City, Ban City, the Highland Wilderness. The cloak had yet to be completely repaired, but the magnetic light had already transcended the hindrance of space and time to form an incorporeal skeleton. It was so weak that Luo Nan himself couldn't quite make sense of it. But it was indeed like. At the very least, the mica structure it affected and interfered with was indeed like a life form that possessed self-awareness. It used its unique perspective to explore this world, to search for the conditions and space for survival in an even broader domain. At this level, it was more and more in line with Luo Nan's imagination and expectations, whether it was from the perspective of conventional empirical logic or from the harsh standards of super-configuration theory. Magnetic Light Mica. Chapter 1092. Was this the magnetic mica jellyfish? Luo Nan didn't have a definite answer for a time. Even though his mental observation could be said to be at the apex of Earth, it was still extremely strenuous for him to capture more details within this marvelous magnetic structure and even decisive evidence. This was determined by the breadth, precision, and level of perception. Luckily, Luo Nan still possessed a fundamental advantage when compared to others. This marvelous existence was something he had created based on the basic design of the school of fantasy. He had combined it with actual examples to produce it step by step. He didn't rely on external machines on the production line he had established. Instead, he relied on the provisions of the laws. A crashing sound rang out on the mental plane. The heavily chained crow hummed, just like how it controlled the wraith sign in the past. It followed the special laws and regulations to permeate into the subtle and complex magnetic structure, attaching and controlling it step by step. The existence that was gradually becoming intelligent, let's call it the magnetic mica jellyfish. It instinctively rejected this situation, but it didn't know how to resist in its naive ignorance. In the end, it allowed the heavily chained crow to penetrate through the lock layer by layer, forming a firm bond with Luo Nan. From the perspective of the magneto-mica jellyfish, it shouldn't be able to understand the meaning of these fetters. It just followed its natural reaction, following the fetters and projecting its unique probing antennae in the opposite direction to point at Luo Nan. In this instant, the special clairvoyance pierced through the cloud layers of the globe, pierced through the projection path of the water vapor fake, and even pierced through Luo Nan's original frame of body and soul on the yacht in Ban City. It pointed straight to a deeper level that even Luo Nan himself wasn't too clear on. According to Luo Nan's current superficial understanding, it should belong to the fantasy layer referred to by super-configuration theory. It formed the core of the laws of super-connection and super-interference. It pointed straight to the fundamental structural method that made Luo Nan Luo Nan Luo Nan. Yes, Luo Nan was searching for an answer from a book. In any case, the magnetic mica jellyfish carried out a warping effect on such a level. It disintegrated, reconstructed all things, and even broke through the barriers of space and time. It constructed a completely new connection that surpassed imagination. Since it possessed this kind of ability, it was necessary to possess the corresponding sensing foundation. At this moment, the magnetic mica jellyfish already manifested its transcendental talent and insight. It was because of this transcendental determinism that the magnetic mica jellyfish was destined to be born with a way of existence, growth path, and corresponding thinking and behavior pattern that was completely different from the normal life that humans understood. The mutual clairvoyance between Luo Nan and the magnetite mica didn't have much of an effect on the magnetite mica, which was practically a blank piece of paper right now. It just had an additional channel to gather information. For the magnetite mica's inconceivable wide-area perception ability, it was better than nothing. But for Luo Nan, he needed to learn and analyze if he wanted to thoroughly understand it. At the same time, the interference effect formed by the magnetic photon mica's clairvoyance naturally led to a reverse pressure. It made Luo Nan's body, which was already not that sturdy to begin with, sway a bit. This was troublesome. This gave Luo Nan a reminder. Right now, the larvae of the magnetic photon mica jellyfish that had just been ignited still had a long way to go before it was complete, but it was already showing signs of growing. It would take some more time to grow. If the difference between the two sides was too great, even as the producer and controller, the final result might not be very good. It wasn't that the magnetite mica had any ill intentions towards him, but when the target was too big and of a high level, some damage was simply unintentional. It was like a slow-moving elephant crushing a tiny ant under its foot. Alexander. So he had actually hatched such a dangerous thing. For this reason, Luo Nan needed to properly sort out the structural relationship between the two sides. Of course, the hatching brought even more benefits. Absolutely great benefits. Luo Nan thought of 4 things right now. At least 4 things. The first was obviously the inconceivable ability of the magnetite mica jellyfish itself. Whether it was the magnetite mica jellyfish's ability to achieve mass control through soul magnetization, or the stitch of any individual to form a demonic army, or the dimensional gate that pierced through the barrier of space and time to lead in the strange creatures of the outer realm, they were all unfathomably powerful methods. Even the larvae found it hard to truly realize the might of a complete body. The value of the research process alone was immeasurable. The second thing was that fortune and misfortune came hand in hand. Controlling the magnetite mica jellyfish and maintaining a close connection formed a new pressure on Luo Nan. But conversely, Luo Nan could use this pressure to further see through the flaws in the current structure of body and soul. Luo Nan had the experience and overall design to construct a perfect body, but he lacked the basic knowledge of traps. However, he was able to see more thoroughly, probe deeper, and find a more reasonable solution. So what if there were some risks? The third thing was a bit more interesting, but it was already reflected in Luo Nan's mental domain, which was currently shrouded in haze. The dark chains and the wraith sign faithfully reflected the laws of the Sunwill Absolute Prison within the chaos formed from the conflict between the Sunwill Absolute Prison and the sinful poison contamination. They guarded within. Meanwhile, within the Fog Palace, that was independent of it and formed from the power of the master of Zhanhe's works, the image of the magnetic mica became clearer and clearer. And it actually possessed some sort of effect. The creatures of the outer realm that Luo Nan saw in the relay station became clearer, especially the shadow cockroach. It was so alive that it seemed as if it could break through the void at any time and leap out. The most important thing was that as the existence of the individual became more prominent, Luo Nan's original fuzzy understanding of the spatial structure of the relay station gained many more reference dimensions. The results of his past thinking became clearer and clearer. Without a doubt, creating a false plane was a typical Luo Nan style of thinking that complicates a simple problem. The probability of its realization grew greater and greater as time passed. If he were to borrow the help of the inner verse simulator, well, it was affected by the pressure of overload. It was still in a state of self-repair. Luckily, Luo Nan used other methods to buy himself some time. A plane was no longer a necessary bargaining chip for the possible threat that would occur in the high-level meeting soon. But Luo Nan would not lower his requirements for it. This was because this was one of the best tools to deal with the deep blue world and Li Wei. There was also the fourth benefit. Luo Nan had already begun to experience a portion of it. It was the wide area, high-level perception of the magnetite mica. Frankly speaking, Luo Nan had yet to figure out what was going on with the magnetite mica's perception. It seemed to be related to electromagnetism, but it was merely something on the surface. After all, his knowledge reserves were insufficient. The level of his perception was too low, and the range was too narrow. Even if the magnetite mica were to completely open up to him, there would still be large areas of the unknown. This was limited by the form of existence that humans possessed. According to Earth's current research, the forms of existence that humans could perceive and observe only accounted for about 4% of all forms of existence in the universe. With the further development of science and technology and the further deepening of the observation of the universe, this proportion would likely continue to decrease and not increase. The mental sensing mode of ability users broke through this upper limit to a large extent. But they were limited by the limitations of their own sensory organs and their long-term experience in sensing. It was hard to fully explain the increased portion. Otherwise, where did the mysterious ability of being a psychic come from? Right now, the magnetite mica provided Luo Nan with a brand new medium for his mental senses. This kind of breadth and depth was a level that was practically impossible to reach in the long natural evolutionary process of human life. Luo Nan's own abilities were largely rooted in his sensing ability. He could rely on this new medium, this new platform, to realize new breakthroughs. In comparison, the soul cloak, which used the structure of water molecules as a medium, was limited in the end. It lacked universality. It was fine in an environment rich in life like Earth, but once it rose to the interstellar realm, it would inevitably become stretched thin. Why did he think of the interstellar realm? Luo Nan raised his head. There was only the endless curtain of night covered by thick clouds above his head. Of course, on the rotating Earth, the coexistence of day and night was inevitable. The luxurious cruise ship was traveling along the 180-degree meridian from east to west. The time difference of 3 hours made it so that the sun was setting in the East 9th District, located on the west side of the Pacific Ocean. The setting sun covered the water, and the sea was dyed in blood. This was the scene Mo La saw when she took a high-speed flight from G-City and arrived at the waters surrounding the Amaterasu court. If one were to say that this scenery was rare, it wasn't. But the surrounding waters were practically covered by dark clouds. It was still enough to make one's eyes light up. Especially when one came from above the cloud layer. The surroundings were covered in dark clouds, and the setting sun alone illuminated this place. The dense colors dyed the sky. It was as if the air was brushed with textures that were hard to see during normal times. It was as if there were incorporeal roots and veins that traveled through the void. They swallowed the nutrients of the world and nurtured an unknown power. Mo La was very familiar with this place. After she landed, she drove the driver to the central region of the Amaterasu court. Incorporeal eyes were spying on her from beginning to end, assessing her state. She did not care about it at all. She whistled a small tune and went around the majestic main entrance of the shrine. She drove straight into the shrine through the forest lane in the middle of the dense forest. She stopped the car at a position that was only about 5 meters away from the shrine owner. Mo La yawned and got out of the car. At that moment, she was still wearing the heavy makeup that made her look like she would enter a nightclub at any time. She looked completely out of place in this holy land of the Amaterasu order. Needless to say, she did not look like the Pope of the Amaterasu order. However, no one said that she was the Pope. At that moment, the bald man who was the most qualified to speak was sitting cross-legged under a tree that was so thick that it would take several people to encircle it. He was reading a book under the dim light from the canopy of the tree. He did not raise his head at all. Well, to be exact, he was flipping through a rather old notebook. Is this the legendary notebook that has the traces of the god and demon sealed in it? Let me have a look. Mo La reached out her hand. The Pope moved away and avoided her hand. He did not even raise his head. You need to rest and build up your strength. Don't get distracted. Hey, didn't you invite me over to decipher this thing? The Pope flipped another page of the notebook in his hand. He still did not raise his head. He only said calmly, first, you can only be considered as assisting in the deciphering work. Second, there is a change in the direction of the current work. Oh. Can the employer change the task at will? Then you can take it as an order. Under the canopy of the tree, the air froze for a moment. Under Mola's exaggerated fake eyelashes, her gaze was cold. However, she quickly returned to her carefree state. Then, what is the order? Wait. The Pope was a man of few words. Mo La did not find this arrangement strange at all. She snorted and walked straight to the Pope's side. She imitated his posture, leaned against the tree, and sat cross-legged. However, she was destined to not be too well-behaved. Soon, she stretched one leg forward and raised both her hands, causing her entire body to stretch. I can tell that this is an urgent task. That's why you responded to it in a hurry. You might even look very pathetic. This does not match your usual style, but it does fit the current situation. As she spoke, Mo La glanced at the notebook a few times. This time, the Pope could not be bothered with her. In fact, he did not respond at all. It was as if he did not care even if he waited until the end of time. Mo La did not care about him either. She leaned against the tree behind her and even rubbed against it a few times. Suddenly, she pulled back her elbow and hit it heavily. What do you want to do to the beautiful lady? The spot where the tip of her elbow hit immediately corroded and caved in. There was a tendency for the corrosion to spread in all directions. Fortunately, it was quickly controlled. A strong vitality was transmitted over to repair the corroded tree trunk. For a moment, cracking sounds could be heard continuously. Before the repair was complete, the bark of the tree that was hit by the elbow was torn. A large number of wood fibers pierced out and quickly wrapped around and took the shape of an adult male. "You rotten woman!" The true god came out of the tree in exasperation. He had the appearance of a young man with a fiery temper. He was tall and strong, but when the dense wood fibers were molded, they formed a large number of patterns. Occasionally, natural spots would appear on the surface, giving people a feeling that he was almost old and inhuman. After this person appeared, he only needed to extend his hand to smash Mola's head. However, the latter did not care about this at all. He continued to lean against the tree trunk and squinted his eyes. He was a typical, catching up on sleep after a night of wild indulgence. He only muttered between his lips and teeth. "Do you look more like a tree or a person now? If it's the former, I won't say anything. If it's the latter, then treat this elbow as my congratulations to you." His voice gradually faded away. The true god lowered his head and stared at Mola using a human's method. For a few seconds, he did not speak. The Pope turned another page and spoke leisurely. "You can't really be treating her as a rotten animal, right? Who doesn't love fresh ingredients?" The true god cast a sidelong glance at his father. "Is there a need for you to beat around the bush? You can't really be treating her as sleeping, can you?" Mola's eyes were still closed, but he suddenly interrupted. "Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you a long time ago." The true god turned his head around again. "What?" "It's none of your business." "I'm asking about that father of yours." Mola's eyes were still closed as he muttered in a low voice. "I wanted to ask, did you really treat her as a foolish son and raise her?" The Pope did not reply again. However, this time, he raised his head. His gaze passed through the luxuriant canopy and branches and looked at the sky that was gradually washing away the blood and turning greenish-gray. He was so engrossed in his gaze that it was as if he wanted to capture the faint light that belonged to the stars. Chapter 1093. In low Earth orbit about 400 kilometers above the Earth's surface, the Jade Dragon was silently operating. As the platform of the old, Magic Cloud, class internal defense circle, Jade Dragon, had been operating in the low Earth orbit for more than 30 years since it was put into service, and it had the experience of firing at landlords many times. Its overall structure couldn't be said to be excellent. In the non-breaking energy-saving state, even if only the life support system and observation system maintained operation, there would still be a considerable degree of mechanical noise. Once a few more modules were opened, the treatment of "leaning against the wall is like a massage bed" was not a lie. At this moment, when the ship's adjutant Claire held onto the handhold on the bulkhead, he felt like he was holding a massage stick. However, he still relied on his 10 years of practical experience in the aerospace army to skillfully use the handhold. With just one push, he easily passed through the nearly 20-meter-long passage. Originally, he could have also calculated the opening time of the automatic sensing door, but the door of the command cabin turned out to be an antique that required a password to enter, so there was nothing he could do. Even if he opened the password-protected door, he still entered the so-called bridge without a hitch. This was the most spacious place in the entire ship. It was close to the height of a 2-story building, and it had an excellent hollow structure. There were fixed positions arranged in a spiral pattern on the inner wall, and there was also a luxurious one-piece projection tactical sand table that made proper use of the hollow structure. In Claire's opinion, this was the most eye-catching design among such antiques. No wonder the officers and soldiers, who were basically suffering from mild, moderate, or severe claustrophobia, were trying their best to fight for the duty in the command cabin so that they could avoid staying in the capsule-style dormitories or the so-called 360-degree starry sky view gyms that were like fish tanks. Of course, they wouldn't be on duty. Wouldn't it be fun to play a few luxurious AR battles with the tactical sand table? But today, when Claire came in, no one was playing games, and the tactical sand table was not even opened. About 1/3 of the seats in the command room were occupied. It seemed that they were also doing something important, and the indicator lights flickered. Claire glanced at it as if the main engine was heating up. "Good day, Commander." Claire retracted her gaze and floated to the command seat. She entered her seat and greeted Major Chao Kai, who was seated beside her. Chao Kai and Claire were both in the prime of their lives. In contrast, Claire looked slightly older, largely because of his prematurely thinning hair. However, in this weightless environment, Chao Kai's overly casual sitting posture made him look lazy and lethargic. In the face of Claire's greeting, Major Chao Kai seemed to be a bit distracted. After 2 seconds, he replied, "Is it daytime in Bus City?" "It's going to be nightfall soon in Ban City." Ban City? Claire was stunned. Although he was greeting in the time of his hometown, Bus City, Major Chao Kai should be from Hu City. Fortunately, he looked at the operating chart of the platform and quickly understood. According to the trajectory of the airship, they would arrive in the sky above Ban City in about a few minutes. If the officer was willing to chat, the adjutant would certainly accompany him. "I haven't been to Ban City yet. I heard that the ruins at the bottom of the lake there are very spectacular. It's a holy land for diving enthusiasts." "That's Beishan Lake." Major Chao Kai's words were a bit erratic, as if there was a bit of emotion in them. His fingers unconsciously fiddled with a crystal ball that was slightly larger than a fist floating and rolling on his fingertips. In fact, it was a fully sealed fish tank with a mini octopus sealed inside. It was a strange, translucent species. Claire's gaze drifted in that direction. As far as he knew, this was transported in the name of scientific research and fell into Major Chao Kai's hands with borrowing procedures. In the end, it became a pet. Strictly speaking, dozens of people in the scientific research, logistics, and command system could suffer together, but who would care? The Magic Cloud class was an old-fashioned airship platform. Its most glorious days had already passed. Back then, they were used as space artillery platforms to bombard the nests of mutants from afar and clean up the tyrannical mutants in the atmosphere. They had made an immortal contribution to the construction of the human defense system in the era of mutation. But now, compared to the younger generation that could freely sail in the solar system, they were indeed old and could only exist as training ships and retirement ships. The Jade Dragon was especially unfortunate. Because it had to take care of research projects that could be used for both military and civilian purposes, it even lost the qualifications to train new recruits. Now, all that was left here were all floating personnel who had been transferred over according to procedures. They had enough seniority and were ready to be promoted or retired. His commanding officer, Major Chao Kai, was an unlucky guy who was about to retire when he was in the prime of his life. Only God knew why. In such an environment, no one would care about such a small detail. In fact, in space life, where birds were no longer used to the outside world, anything new and interesting would be pleasing to the eye. Even Claire himself was a bit moved by the little thing that had survived in the sealed fish tank. He was already thinking that after Major Chao Kai got tired of it, maybe he could borrow it and play with it for a few days. Of course, he couldn't do it now. In fact, as an adjutant, he had only been transferred here for a few days and wasn't close enough to Major Chao Kai and his old subordinates. For example, right now, he hesitated for a moment before deciding to make a small joke to close the distance. "If it's Sakura City. Sir should have a special memory there, right?" "Very special." The corner of Chao Kai's mouth twitched, then he took the initiative to change the topic. "You're not on duty right now." "What's the matter?" Claire shrugged. "It's just a little sensitive to the idle jitter." "Are we going to apply the brakes?" "Yes, the altitude of the platform's orbit is currently 392 kilometers. The Research Institute hopes to raise it to more than 428 kilometers to optimize the observation angle. The ground process has been completed." The words of the sugar daddy were indeed useful. Of course, Claire didn't say this out loud. After all, the sugar daddy who paid for 75% of the platform's operating costs had the right to be respected. Claire didn't take this seriously. For the aerospace army, it was already the interstellar era. This kind of old platform was nothing compared to those ships that cruised freely in the solar system. A simple maneuver of a few hundred to 1,000 kilometers was nothing. Do you need me to do anything? It's not like you're on duty. What can I do? Major Chow Kai said casually. Claire was a little embarrassed. She could only explain in her heart that this was probably a sign that the relationship between the two sides was closer. Fortunately, Major Chow Kai had a follow-up. Since you said this, just in time. Help me supervise them to do the overall heat engine test. In addition to the engine, the other systems also have to be temporarily awakened. Clarify the status, and form a report with the test results. This is probably the last document I'll sign in the military. Claire really didn't know how to respond. She could only reply, yes, sir. At this moment, the sergeant in the opposite seat reported, the main cannon power test has been completed. Do you want to continue charging? Claire was shocked. Main cannon. Chapter 1094. The main cannon of the Jade Dragon wasn't actually a cannon at all. The Magic Cloud class internal defense ship platform was known as a space-based weapon platform. In fact, it was limited by the conditions of the past. It was only equipped with two types of weapons according to its two main functions. One was an electromagnetic railgun used to lock onto the troublesome mutants that cruised in the upper and middle layers of the atmosphere. It had astonishing single-target killing efficiency. Everyone was used to calling it the secondary cannon. The other type was a weapon of mass destruction that was specially designed to target the mutant nests in the wilderness and the extremely powerful mutants that were beyond imagination. It was the so-called main cannon. The main cannon charging that the sergeant mentioned was strictly speaking to charge the launcher. As the military's strategic posture toward the wilderness changed from defense to counterattack and gradually gained the initiative, new types of war weapons emerged one after another. The Magic Cloud class platform had basically withdrawn from the front line. Now, it was only engaged in scientific research, shooting birds, and helping to clear high-altitude routes. It basically no longer carried out ground attack missions. However, it was still in a state of preparation for war. The ammunition base was reduced by half, and there was still one round of ammunition for the main cannon. Claire wasn't worried about anything else. She was worried that the soldiers on the ship, whose sense of responsibility was at an all-time low, would make a careless mistake and throw out the deadly thing in the magazine. It wouldn't explode. Without authorization from the ground, this thing was just a lump of iron. However, if it really floated in the atmosphere, they would immediately become the joke of the aerospace army. At the same time, the aerospace army would also become the joke of the entire Earth. Although there was a high chance that many people wouldn't be able to laugh. In fact, there was already a precedent for this kind of situation where people couldn't laugh. Sir, during the dark side exercise last year, you mean the Yoda incident? Major Chow Kai understood instantly, but he had no intention of changing his order. On the contrary, he undid the fastening buckle on his chair and floated up. During this time, he casually pushed the crystal ball toward Claire, who instinctively reached out to grab it. So, I need my adjutant to focus. You stay here and watch for a while. I'll go clean up the internal affairs. Yes, sir. What else could Claire say? Moreover, looking at the translucent octopus that he suddenly obtained, he felt that this was really a pleasant surprise. Normally, he would only take a few glances at this little thing from afar. This was his first time seeing it up close. He spun the crystal ball, and the little thing inside also spun, as if it was enjoying it. How did it survive? Claire had no clue at all. After two more shakes, the water sealed inside had already formed a whirlpool. This time, the little octopus instinctively went around and stuck close to the inner wall. It just so happened that its head and one of its eyes were squeezed here. Through the light of the water, it twisted into a rather absurd expression and looked over. The two of them stared at each other. This little orange-red thing was an octopus larva. Its tentacles weren't obvious, and it looked particularly adorable. However, the structure of its eyes was a little strange. Amidst the flickering watery light, it looked a little dazzling and blurry. If one looked at it for a long time, they would feel a little dizzy. Interesting. Claire was even more determined to ask Major Chow Kai for it. This time, she wasn't just playing with it. She was going to ask for the exact same one. After all, Claire had an above-average sense of responsibility. She diverted her attention and quickly returned to business. After all, he was different from Major Chow Kai. He was a transient personnel, not a retired personnel. He had accumulated enough seniority as an adjutant, and there was still a bright future waiting for him. Claire was very attentive to the task Major Chow Kai had arranged. He unconsciously played with the crystal ball while opening the tactical sand table. The large projection space that was transparent from top to bottom showed the monitoring diagram of the entire ship. He focused on the system module related to the main cannon. After confirming that there were no abnormalities, he let out a sigh and continued to check the other modules. Speaking of which, Major Chow Kai's suggestion of heat engine testing was quite necessary. There hadn't been any combat missions in the past 2 years. With just the lightweight operation of the auxiliary cannon, some problems couldn't be discovered. For example, the research institute that was under their jurisdiction had actually secretly changed the backup information circuit. They should have stolen a part of the computing power of the platform. This was King's serious problem, alright? What was Myra, the chief mechanic, doing? If Claire was the chief officer, he would have immediately scolded Myra, but he wasn't, so he could only write it down first and report it to Chow Kai later. Also. Hey, number 3. Claire directly reminded that lock-on operation is redundant. The tactical sand table faithfully reflected the operating status of each system module. It also pushed some highly sensitive changes to the core work area. Claire glanced at the map of the target area displayed on the sand table and half-jokingly reminded, if you really want to bomb Ban City, the location is also off. It's the North Mountain Lake area. The tactical nuclear bomb in the magazine only has a yield of 50,000 tons. It can't even cover the surface of the lake, number 3. The person who answered Claire was the silent back of the number 3 non-commissioned officer. The silence lasted for at least 5 seconds, and from the second, Claire felt that something was wrong. In fact, during this time, other than the non-commissioned officer operating the main cannon in the opposite position, the one who had previously reported that the main cannon was energized, the other people had remained silent and didn't make any movements. It had been like this since he entered the command cabin. As for the one in number 3, even though he was scolded in the face, he didn't make the slightest sound. No. Claire reached for the electric beam gun at his waist. He didn't want to do anything. He still didn't understand what was going on. This action was just an instinctive reaction. But halfway through his hand, he realized that he was still holding the crystal ball in his hand, so he was stunned. It was also at this moment that his palm inexplicably felt cold, as if something cold and sticky had penetrated the outer wall of the crystal ball and made contact with him. Claire was startled and instinctively swung her hand, but she had only swung it halfway when a strong numbness spread from her palm to her entire palm, then to her wrist, elbow joints, and then like an electric shock, it instantly spread to her whole body. Ugh! Claire uttered a meaningless syllable and froze in his own seat. The fixed buckle locked his body, allowing him to maintain his previous sitting posture. There was no difference between him and the silent people in the seats. In the weightless environment, the crystal ball floated from his numb palm. The mini-octopus swam inside as if it was controlling everything. Claire really suspected that the paralyzing toxin that was raging in his body was the masterpiece of the mini-octopus. If that was the case, the door of the command cabin opened again, and Major Chow Kai, who had gone to clean up previously, came back in. The Supreme Commander of the Jade Dragon turned a blind eye to the scene in front of him, as if this was the norm on the ship. He didn't go to retrieve the floating crystal ball either. Instead, he returned to the command seat and began a series of operations. Claire, whose neck was stiff, didn't even have the strength to turn his head. He couldn't see the situation above his side and could only hear the continuous short prompts. On the tactical sand table, the light and shadow changed. The previously prominent target became clearer and clearer, and round after round of operations were carried out around it. Crazy, crazy. Claire's already somewhat numb throat made a vague sound. At this time, even if he was a fool, he could guess what Chao Kai wanted to do. A surge of blood rushed up his throat, making him roar, "Sir! Chao Kai! Is your brain eaten by bugs?" Claire didn't know why Chao Kai did this, and why he did such a meaningless stupid thing. "You're joking, right? Without authorization from the ground, even if you forcibly put a nuclear bomb on the launcher, it will only be a lump of iron. At most, it will explode in the thermosphere. Apart from a little bit of nuclear pollution, what else can you do?" Chao Kai didn't say anything and continued the corresponding operations. Claire looked at the various commands and authorization interfaces on the tactical sand table, and his eyelids twitched violently. He really couldn't understand it. Under normal circumstances, it would require 7 to 8 people to work together. How could Chao Kai, a single person, including the obviously problematic operator of the main cannon, be able to move it with just 2 people, and at such a high speed? Moreover, at least 2 links that needed to be reported to the ground were inexplicably skipped. All the authorization locks and security doors were useless. There are also accomplices on the ground? Or is Chao Kai himself a super hacker who has hidden his strength? Thousands of thoughts and thousands of doubts finally turned into one sentence: why? After saying this, Claire's mind became clearer. The reason why he asked was that he really didn't understand, and he also wanted to delay and wait for changes. Chao Kai still didn't respond and only focused on operating. Claire could only try to find something to say, trying to fight against the numbness in his throat and mouth. "Let me guess, it's because you want to retire, early retirement?" "Yes." Chao Kai unexpectedly spoke, and his answer was especially straightforward, just like the beeping sounds of his subordinates. "What kind of damned reason is that? Is that the reason you want to bomb Ban City and take revenge on society?" "First of all, I'm not bombing Ban City. Second, I'm not taking revenge on society." Chao Kai's voice didn't have the previous lazy and casual tone. "My target is, as you can see, the Ban City trade zone on Beishan Lake. The target of my revenge is also there." "Huh? Didn't I say that?" "I didn't say that because I'm a secret recipient of the mutation infection. There's a so-called infection threat, and then I'll be forced to retire." "Ah, I really forgot to tell you." "Mutation?" Claire really didn't expect it to be this domain. Hee, if it's the same for everyone, then it's fine, but do you have it in the city?" "Oh, you're in Europe, then in East Asia, Spring City, that guy in Spring City, has become a hero and star. Not to mention the New World, why did I have to do this in whose city, a place like this? Directly report to the military?" Claire really wanted to shout, "This might just be a reason for someone to mess with you. But what's the point of discussing this?" In contrast, Chao Kai's target was Ban City, which was even more unreasonable. "Whose city messed with you, so you're taking revenge on whose city? What does it have to do with Ban City? My wife and children are all there." This reason was so powerful that Claire was suddenly speechless. Of course, this is only one of the reasons. Chao Kai completely opened up a chatterbox, and his words flowed without end. "Discrimination against the mutated infected has never been an exception, and it's not targeted at me personally. The stupidest thing for the weak is to resign themselves to adversity and fight alone. People like me can only hug each other for warmth. So this time, I'm doing this for myself, but also not for myself. I'm also doing this for those like me, because of a so-called mutation infection, and they're labeled and thrown into the laboratory at any time to be squeezed out of their blood, sweat, and tears. What **T logic? Isn't that so? The trade zone in Ban City is indeed **T. How many vagrants and mutated infected people are squeezed in every year? Claire was so angry that she laughed. You idiot, even if this is the case, with this cannon, the laboratory can be rebuilt, the researchers can be recruited, and the data can be backed up. The tens of thousands of vagrants and mutated infected people who are still alive over there will all be finished. Yes, that's right. I'm using this method to help them get rid of the impurity and pain of the mutation. Claire was stunned, and finally realized the extremely absurd point. Even you are discriminating against yourself, I don't deny it. Chao Kai's tone was very calm. Some people are intoxicated by the ugly power and existence of the mutation, but we are not. Our church pursues the divine kingdom that is constructed together with the power of the soul. We want to use the torrent of holy light in the divine kingdom to cleanse the mutated superfluous and malignant tumors of matter. Cult? Whatever you think. The Soul Church? Claire's thoughts went one step deeper. The military had to screen and report the churches on the list of illegal religions, and, constructing the divine kingdom of the soul together, was the symbolic doctrine of the Soul Church. This was also one of the most active illegal churches recently. Chao Kai tacitly agreed. Hee hee. Claire only had the strength left to laugh bitterly. The military intelligence and the investigation department must be eating **T. You want such a lunatic who believes in a cult to be the commander of a ship. Also, this kind of technology that can bypass authorization and launch a city-destroying attack on its own, what the hell is going on? In this possibly meaningless conversation, at least 5 or more authorization gates were broken without any response. The corresponding feedback mechanism didn't seem to be working, and the ground didn't even respond. Of course, it could also be disconnected. On the bright side, maybe there would be countermeasures outside, but the inside of the ship didn't know. By the time they found out, they should have already been smashed into pieces by space-based weapons. As for the bad side, when Ban City turned into a sea of fire, the ground would wake up, and then this side would be smashed into pieces by space-based weapons. They were all pieces, and there seemed to be no difference. As this thought flashed through his mind, Claire's body became more and more numb. He couldn't help but think that maybe he would directly die in the poisonous kiss of the octopus. He turned his gaze with difficulty. The thing that used to be cute, but now only felt terrifying, floated in the light and shadow of the tactical sand table. It happened to be near Ban City, like a demon seal. Stuck on it, it marked death.